If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 61. Aela was here. Panic was not usually the first emotion one was supposed to feel when their niece came to visit, but Iroh would admit that his family was rather more complicated than average. Given what had happened at the North Pole, Aela's presence was probably a threat to Zuko. However, it was just as foolish to assume the worst in someone as to blindly trust them, and Iroh had learned that treating people with civility opened the most opportunities for a beneficial encounter for all. He would be prepared to take Zuko and run the moment he sensed true hostility, but for now he would take the chance to talk with his niece in the most peaceful setting he knew. Over a nice cup of tea. Hidden behind his cup, Iroh allowed himself a small grin at his niece and nephew's identically pinched expressions as they drank their first sips of tea. For all they both took after their father in very different ways, they'd both inherited their taste buds from their mother's side of the family. "What's the matter, Aela? Is the taste too strong for you?" Zuko taunted, trying and failing to mask his own dislike. Honestly, siblings. They'd gone years without seeing each other, and the first thing they do is start jabbing each other. Aela sniffed proudly, her ironclad facade of calm shutting across her face at the suggestion of a perceived weakness. "Hardly. I have merely become more accustomed to other drinks recently." "Oh? Other blends of tea, perhaps?" Iroh interjected. Hopefully Aela hadn't begun developing a taste for wine, as many girls did at her age. The world would not survive Aela's first hangover. "Not quite," Aela replied, reaching into a satchel and pulling out a jar filled with black powder. She scooped generous spoonfuls into 3 empty teacups, stirred them and handed them out. "Here, try some." Zuko and Iroh shared a suspicious glance, suspecting some form of trickery, but curiosity eventually got the better of them. In unison they lifted the cups of strange-smelling liquid to their mouths and took a sip. "Poison. Evil. Distilled essence of darkness." Iroh spat the bitter tincture out like a geyser erupting with water. What was this? Some wicked creation of vilest alchemy? If Aela was trying to poison him, he'd have at least expected her to have the courtesy to disguise it with something sweet. Yet to his horror, Aela was gulping down the poison like a desert traveler drank the waters of an oasis, and Zuko was humming with surprised pleasure. "That's rather good. What's it called?" his nephew asked. Aela finished downing her entire cup before answering. "Coffee. It's made from grinding down a bean found on a little island in colony territory, and can temporarily stave off the need for sleep. Tanya bought the entire island, and is turning the whole place into one big farm. I think she plans to start selling to the nobility once it's producing enough for more than a few people. One more black mark on that girl's ever-growing list of crimes." Truly this war had corrupted the youth of the Fire Nation if they thought this evil bean soup could be considered delicious. Zuko finished his own cup, and then his distrustful scowl returned. "Why are you here?" Aela shot back a coy smirk. "So hostile. After I came all this way to deliver you the good news personally, you treat your own sister with such scorn. Have you become uncivilized so soon, Zuzu?" "Don't call me that," Zuko snarled. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Iroh interjected politely. There was no flaw or tick in Aela's smile to give away her true thoughts. She paused, enjoying the suspense, and then delivered the 5 words Zuko had wanted to hear for so long. "Father has ended your banishment." Iroh's eyes widened in surprise at the unexpected proclamation. His brother was not one to go back on his own decisions unless they benefited him more than his loss of pride. For what reason would he want the son he'd treated so poorly back at his side? Yet if he was surprised, Zuko was downright blown away. The look of desperate hope on his face was painful to see. It's over. I can come home," he all but whispered. Aela nodded, and for the first time in many, many years a quick flash of worry flickered across her expression. "Indeed. To tell you the truth, Zuko, the situation at home is getting rather tense. There's whispers of assassins, rebellions, and military coups, and all alongside one person's name." Iroh frowned. It didn't take a genius to guess who that might be. "Tanya." "That's right," Aela replied. "She already has the navy in her pocket, and she's a hero to many of the soldiers deployed in the Earth Kingdom. Amongst civilians she's beloved as well thanks to her victory up north, and the Fire Sages have been spreading the idea that her unusual hair color is a sign that she's been chosen by Agni. If the rumors are true and Tanya really does make a bid for the throne, it could plunge our nation into civil war at the worst possible moment. Father needs people he can absolutely trust, people who have stood up to her before, by his side. In the end the only ones you can really trust are your family. Aela weaved a compelling story. Power had always been Ose's first and foremost concern, and if there was even the slightest hint that Tanya might threaten the control he held over the Fire Nation, he would begin plotting countermeasures against her. After what he'd witnessed at the North Pole, he wouldn't put it past Tanya to have ambitions to steal the throne either. Yet what didn't sit quite right with him was that final statement. Ose did not hold the trust between family to be sacred, indeed, it was by abusing that very trust that he'd stolen the throne in the first place. Zuko, bless his poor, wounded heart, looked utterly thrown. His mouth hung open wide enough for a family of bugs to fly into. When his silence lingered for too long, Aela narrowed her eyes at him. Did you hear me? You should be happy. Excited. Grateful. I just gave you great news. I'm sure your brother just needs a moment. Iroh began, but was cut off as Aela turned her glare on him. Don't interrupt, uncle. Her eyes flicked back to Zuko, and her annoyance seemed to be quickly growing. I still haven't heard my thank you. I'm not a messenger. I didn't have to come all this way. But Zuko didn't seem to register her words, or anything else in the world around him. He was completely caught in his own thoughts. Father regrets? He wants me back. He whispered, more to himself than Aela. Aela let out a frustrated sigh. I can see you need time to take this in. I'll come to call on you tomorrow. Good evening. With that she stood up sharply and left, leaving the two of them to wrestle with the weight of her words. Iroh snuck a glance at Zuko, not at all surprised to find that he was lost in thought. Despite what his attitude would suggest at first impressions, Zuko was a very trusting young man, even towards people who probably didn't deserve it. It was simultaneously one of his greatest strengths and most obvious weaknesses. When he learned to temper that trusting heart with wisdom and experience he would grow into a fantastic Fire Lord, but right now it was plain to see that he was letting his heart rule his head. Iroh had his doubts about this, and would approach this situation with a great deal of caution, but the chance that it was true was too good to pass up immediately. Thus he would do what he always did, stay by Zuko's side, keep his eyes peeled for any threats, and gently provide the counsel his nephew needed to grow into the great man he was one day destined to be. Chapter 62. That night, as darkness fell, the soldiers aboard Aela's ship began to silently disembark. They moved quickly and quietly into the nearby woods, setting up crude checkpoints and barricades on the roads just far enough away to be out of sight from the spa. Machetes worked tirelessly to hack away patrol paths in the undergrowth, and the driest branches were wrapped in cloth to make makeshift torches and strapped to nearby trees, ready to be lit at a moment's notice. Sentries armed with horns built temporary lookouts in the trees or dug trenches under bushes, allowing them to see everything around them and signal for backup at a moment's notice. For the residents of the spa there was no sign of the work being done besides the cries of startled wildlife, yet slowly but surely a cage was being built around them. Aela had to admit, however reluctantly, that Tanya's military formation was a sight to behold. She knew that no soldier they'd brought along would be able to stall Iroh for more than a few seconds, so she made sure that in those few seconds they could call the rest of the army to their location and swarm him with overwhelming numbers. The main roads were blocked with spiked wooden walls, and the forest floors between her patrol paths laced with all manner of crude yet effective traps. It would take a spirit to slip out of her net. Which was a problem, because Aela knew her uncle well enough to tell that he was suspicious of the story she'd brought them. Zuko was hooked, so she reckoned her chances of success were high, but if her deception failed it was imperative that Tanya's cage formation failed too. And that meant that someone needed to make a little hole in it. If I was Zuko, and I was trying to flee, where would I go? Thinking back to their childhood games of hide and seek, Aela's eyes turned to the forest. Zuko always had liked nature, and with only Uncle to keep an eye on would forsake the roads in favor of the cover the trees could offer him. He'd try to use the shadows to mask his escape. Unfortunately for him, the torches that the soldiers would light as soon as Tanya sent up a flare would rob him of those shadows. Unless those torches don't work. Aela paced along the edge of the forest, picturing 100 scenarios in her head. It was likely that Zuko would run towards the middle area, it was in the exact opposite direction of her warship, and without the shoreline to either of his sides he'd have more options for changing direction later when throwing off pursuers. Speed would also be the first and foremost concern on his mind, so he'd avoid any areas that looked too heavy with bushes and other heavy flora that might obstruct him. There were 3 possible routes, all already identified by Tanya and laden with traps. It'd be too suspicious if the traps on all 3 routes were mysteriously sabotaged, which meant that she somehow had to deduce which one her brother would take. After a moment's consideration, Aela realized that such would be impossible. Zuko was just as likely to take any of the routes as the other, and predicting which would be pure guesswork. Yet this did not daunt the princess. Leaving such matters to chance was the mark of the lazy and stupid, and Aela was neither of these things. If she could not deduce which option Zuko would take, she would simply have to remove his options until one remained. After a quick look around to check that nobody was watching, Aela approached the central route and pressed a finger to the tree trunk next to it. Black steam began to hiss around it as her superheated finger bubbled and burnt the bark, leaving a small but ugly mark. The kind only a firebender could leave. Aela then repeated the process on a tree next to the left root, leaving only the right root clean. With signs of firebender presence upon them, Zuko would go for the right route. He wouldn't have time to consider how out of place the marks were. Aela then walked along the right route, making sure to act as if she were inspecting the traps in case any soldier was watching. She did not outright sabotage them, for it was important that she make herself complicit as little as possible, but she did make subtle adjustments to make them just a little bit more noticeable for her naive big brother. Whenever she passed an unlit torch, Aela rubbed dirt into the cloth to make them dimmer and harder to stay lit. Under cover of night it was doubtful that anybody else would notice, and by the time morning came it would be too late to replace them. Now to make sure my own plan goes smoothly, so that none of this will be needed in the first place. She thought to herself, slinking off back to her ship. For all his faults Zuko always had been pretty decent at sneaking around, and with the adjustments she'd made Aela was confident that even he should be able to escape Tanya's cage if the situation ever got that far. Tomorrow was sure to be a busy day for everyone, and she could sleep soundly tonight knowing that even if she did not win, nobody else would either. Sleep had not come easily to Zuko that night. Positive and negative emotions warred within him, filling his body with restless energy and his sleep with strange nightmares. On the one hand he was overjoyed, father wanted him home, and all the mistakes he'd made would be forgiven. He would be welcomed back with honor, and the long days of struggle and strife he'd lived within these last years would finally be over. Yet on the other hand Uncle had expressed his doubts about father's true intentions, and looking back on it now Zuko would admit that he had not handled it the most maturely when Uncle raised those concerns with him. I think you are exactly what you seem. A lazy, mistrustful, shallow old man who's always been jealous of his brother. Regret washed over Zuko as his mind recalled the words he'd shouted in the heat of anger. Uncle had not deserved his scorn. While he was certainly a carefree man he was not lazy, and far from mistrustful or shallow. Yet in that moment all Zuko had wanted to do was hurt him. And I succeeded. And now there would never be a chance to apologize. Uncle seemed to want to stay here, leaving Zuko to return to the palace alone. Soldiers formed lines on either side of the gangplank leading to the deck of the vessel, saluting him crisply as he passed with a respect that his former crew had never shown. Despite his inner conflict, Zuko couldn't help but smile at the feeling of importance it gave him. It's finally happening. I'm going home. Wait. Zuko turned at the sound of a familiar voice behind him, to find Uncle running up the gangplank behind him. Zuko was worried that something was wrong at first, but grinned as he noticed the backpack Uncle was carrying with him. You changed your mind? He exclaimed happily. Uncle shot him a sheepish grin. Family should stick together, right? Yes, they should. And once they were back at the homeland they would. He, Uncle, Aela and father would stick together from now on. Aela was waiting for them at the top on the bridge of the ship, a pleased smile curled on her lips. Brother. Uncle. Welcome. I'm so glad you decided to come. She greeted sweetly. Are we ready to depart, Your Highness? The captain of the ship asked. Aela nodded. Set our course for home, Captain. Home. Zuko barely noticed that he'd let the wistful whisper slip past his lips. Finally. He had his uncle with him, his honor restored, and his father's love back. Everything was perfect. The captain raised his hand to gesture to the crew. You heard the princess. Raise the anchors. We're taking the prisoners home. And just like that, everything froze. Time seemed to stand completely still. Everyone, from the common soldiers to Aela herself, seemed to tense up, not daring to move a muscle for fear of breaking the sudden heavy atmosphere that had dropped upon them. Zuko could only stare wide-eyed at the captain, a cold, sinking feeling settling in his gut as his brain struggled to process the word he was sure he'd hear, yet didn't want to believe. Prisoner? Beads of sweat broke out across the captain's face as he realized his mistake. He stared back at Zuko, seeming just as taken aback as he was. Your Highness, I... Whatever he was going to say would forever remain a mystery, as the sound of roaring fire and cries of fear shattered the tension. Uncle had not been willing to wait for them to make the first move and struck first, blasting 4 nearby soldiers off the gangplank and into the water before they even realized what was happening. The other soldiers burst into action, and the whole ship fell into chaos. Zuko grabbed hold of the captain with one hand and threw him overboard with a dismissive shove, then snapped back around to glare hatefully at Aela. You lied to me! He roared, twin daggers of flame bursting out from his clenched fists. The corner of Aela's mouth curled up into a smug smirk. Like I've never done that before. With an angry snarl Zuko lunged at her, slashing his daggers in an enraged flurry. Yet the smirk never left Aela's face as she danced through his attacks with casual ease, deliberately passing up her openings to counterattack in favor of taunting him. You know, Father blames you for the loss of the North Pole. Tanya told him all about how she'd had everything under control, the Avatar, the Water Tribe army, even the moon itself, until you betrayed her. She chuckled mockingly. Why would he want you home, except to lock you up where you can no longer embarrass him? I was doing the right thing. Zuko yelled back, redoubling his attempts to land a hit. She was desecrating the bodies of the dead. Slaughtering enemies who'd given up fighting. Trying to execute a child. That caused Aela to laugh. So what? Do you really think that sort of thing hasn't already happened during the last 100 years of war? Do you think the Earth Kingdom and Water Tribes would have hesitated to do the exact same thing if they had the chance? That's no excuse to forget our honor. Zuko countered. Isn't it? I'm not so sure. Perhaps we should get a second opinion. Aela replied slyly. She raised her voice to a sing-song tone. Oh Admiral! A rush of heat and orange light erupted from one of the hatches on the deck, and Zuko's heart stopped as a streak of gold soared into the sky. No. Not her. Chapter 63. Aela, Tanya thought absently, really did have a powerful urge to be dramatic. Perhaps it was a trait passed down along the Fire Lord's bloodline? It would explain their fondness for receiving important matters of state while shadowed behind an imposing wall of fire. Whatever the case, Tanya had observed that even as a little girl, Aela had a tendency to get very theatrical when carrying out one of her cunning plans without realizing it. If they were back in her first world, Aela would totally be a drama kid. It was a harmless, perhaps even a little endearing, trait that Tanya didn't mind humoring to keep her happy. It was for that reason that, when she heard the sound of combat breaking out on the deck above, Tanya held her position for a couple of seconds. Iroh had once been a powerful bender, trained since birth in the royal style and capable of personally leading the charge against the Earth Kingdom in his youth, but that was in the past. Now he was old and overweight, and even with Zuko at his side there was no way he could overcome Aela and a full squadron of soldiers alone. There was no harm in waiting a few seconds to let Aela have her fun before reinforcing her. Oh Admiral! Speaking of the devil, that sounded like her cue. Flames erupted from Tanya's feet as she propelled herself up and through the pre-opened hatch, blasting into the sky like a rocket ship. Okay, so maybe she'd picked up a flare for the dramatic too somewhere along the line. So what? As she slowed her propulsion down to a hover, Tanya took a bird's-eye view look down at the scene below her. What she saw didn't please her. Iroh was tearing through her soldiers like they were made of wet paper. Generally speaking, elderly people struggled with the high levels of aggression and energy called for by most fire-bending styles, yet that didn't seem to be the case for Iroh. It wasn't that he was any faster or more acrobatic than she'd been expecting, but that his style was like nothing she'd ever seen before. She could see moves from the royal and military styles that served as the base, but strung together with them were movements that she recognized from the northern water-bending style, a few earthbender stances, as well as what seemed suspiciously like some sort of dance movements. It was weird to watch, yet Tanya could not deny its effectiveness. Whenever a jet of fire came towards him, Iroh reached out and took control of it, stealing the flames away from his enemy, and then combining it with his own fire to make his own attack twice as powerful. He expended half as much energy on attacks, and then flowed between solid stances or surprisingly agile dodges to defend himself, conserving his energy for important moments and finishing blows in a way no other firebender she'd ever seen did. He's stolen techniques from the other nations. Incorporated them into his own moveset. Tanya realized. He'd have had plenty of opportunities to copy the earthbenders he warred against during his youth, and could have scavenged what he could from the scrolls and murals left behind at the airbending temples he and Zuko had searched when they first set out to hunt for the Avatar. Yet why he seemed so much more proficient in waterbending movements was a mystery. Fortunately, that unexpected show of prowess would not be enough. Only a foolish commander based their strategy on the ability of one particular fighter. As strong as Iroh might be, even he would be worn down by the combined waves of soldiers relentlessly smashing into him as he tried to escape. And besides, he had a weak link. Zuko didn't stand a chance against Aela. He was upset and angry, wasting his strength on pointlessly aggressive moves that Aela could see coming from miles away. Even if Iroh did clear a path for them to flee the ship, Zuko was so focused on attacking Aela that he might have ignored the opportunity. It really was amazing how effective Aela's mind games could be. Since Aela didn't need any backup, Tanya moved to support her troops on the gangplank before Iroh could crush them all. She lobbed a large, clumsy fireball directly at Iroh, predicting that he would move to steal control of it, then followed it up with a smaller, more intense bolt of fire hidden behind the first. As expected, Iroh's hand snapped out to grab the fireball with practiced ease, already twisting to redirect it as the firebolt snuck up on him. "Got you." Yet to her surprise, Iroh shifted his weight from one foot to the other, turning his twist into a spin that carried him out of the path of the firebolt just in the nick of time. Drat! He saw it coming. As he spun, Iroh brought the hand holding Tanya's fireball out towards his mouth, opening his jaw as if about to eat it. Yet instead of inhaling, Iroh blew out, conjuring a wave of rolling flames like the breath of a dragon that grew even brighter as they absorbed Tanya's fireball. Tanya dove to the side to avoid it, scowling at the sheer heat. No wonder they called him the Dragon of the West. Still, the fact that he'd opted to dodge the second attack rather than absorb it was telling. Quicker, more intense blasts must have been more difficult for him to steal control of. Jetting to the left, Tanya jabbed out a series of 3 punches, each one unleashing another quick firebolt at Iroh. Iroh shifted his feet, settling into an adaptation of what Tanya recognized to be the Earthbender's famous horse stance. He thrust out with a palm strike at the first firebolt, swatting it to the side like a pinball in a shower of sparks, then brought his arm back to bounce the second bolt off his elbow. As the third one drew near, he lashed out with an overhead chop, smacking it directly down into the gangplank. It was becoming obvious that fighting at a distance wasn't working out as intended. Switching tactics, Tanya blasted towards Iroh in a straight charge, reasoning that the natural flexibility of youth would give her the advantage in close quarters. As she drew closer, Tanya flipped forwards, falling feet first, and slid along the gangplank with a wave of fire behind her. Iroh waited until she was about an inch away from hitting him, then leapt just high enough for her to sail harmlessly beneath him. He stomped down on the wave of fire behind her, parting it in a circle all around him like a meteor crater, then turned around to release a whip of flames. Tanya was still on the ground after her attempted tackle, and had to roll quickly to the side to avoid the sting of the whip. While lying on her front, she placed her hands flat on the floor, as if about to do a press-up, and unleashed 2 fierce blasts of fire to immediately boost herself up to a standing position. Iroh hadn't taken the opportunity to press his attack, so Tanya settled back into a fighting stance and decided to buy herself a moment to catch her breath. "I thought you'd be quicker. Am I giving the fabled Dragon Slayer a run for his money?" she taunted. Yet Iroh let the insult slide off him like water on a duck's back. "Indeed," he replied. "You must be getting rather good at beating up tired old men." Tanya grit her teeth, and sprinted up the gangplank at him. A sharp blast of flame from her feet jettisoned her upward quickly enough to try and knee Iroh in the face, but one of the old general's hands snapped up to catch it, whilst the other went higher to block the hammer blow Tanya tried to follow up with before she'd even begun it. With a strong grip on her knee, he slammed Tanya down onto the ground, then grabbed one of her wrists as he stepped over her to pin her in an arm lock. Fortunately for Tanya, she wasn't fighting alone. Just as she cried out at the uncomfortable pressure on her shoulder, a couple of fireballs thrown by the other soldiers surrounding them forced Iroh to disengage and use both hands to redirect them. Sensing her chance, Tanya rolled onto her back and kicked up between Iroh's legs, aiming for the family jewels. At the last possible moment, Iroh twisted one leg, deflecting the kick with his knee, and gave a very disapproving glare down at Tanya for the cheap shot. One hand grasped the ankle of Tanya's overextended leg, and with a shriek Tanya found herself whipping through the air as Iroh swung her around in a circle and threw her at the 2 soldiers who'd interfered. Chapter 64. At the last possible moment, Iroh twisted one leg, deflecting the kick with his knee, and gave a very disapproving glare down at Tanya for the cheap shot. One hand grasped the ankle of Tanya's overextended leg, and with a shriek Tanya found herself whipping through the air as Iroh swung her around in a circle and threw her at the two soldiers who'd interfered. Tanya may not have been the heaviest person in the world, but she was wearing metal armor, and as she crashed into the two soldiers the force of the throw was enough to send the three of them tumbling off the gangplank and into the water below. Tanya scowled balefully as she shook off the dizziness and began swimming back up to the surface. Again with the damn throwing. Why couldn't I have been reborn with a stockier body? I never had these problems in my first life. She took in a huge, greedy gulp of air as she broke the water's surface, and a second or two of listening revealed that Iroh had not let his opportunity slip by. Powerful blasts of fire rampaged off the gangplank as he continued to blast the remaining soldiers into the water. Zuko! It's time to go! She heard him yell. Yet Zuko's furious yells as he took swing after swing at Aela did not cease. The exiled prince was too caught up in his fury towards Aela to listen. Tanya turned and swam for the shoreline, cursing the fact that she couldn't generate fire underwater and thus couldn't take off until she reached dry land. Every second wasted was a second that Zuko could realize the mistake he was making and turn to run. Within the minute Tanya reached the shoreline, and powerful blasts of fire from her hands and feet had her soaring back into the sky with a trail of hissing steam behind her. It was not a moment too late, for she spotted Zuko finally disengaging from Aela and running to Iroh on the gangplank. She moved to intercept them before they could reach the end of the plank, shooting a continuous stream of flames at the duo to stop them from escaping while her soldiers dragged themselves back to shore to rejoin the fight. To her surprise it was Zuko, not Iroh, who moved forward to counter her attack. He planted his front foot firmly into the ground and knelt low, bringing both hands together into a clap that parted her stream of flames like a ship cutting through water. That's Zhao's move. Tanya realized, recalling when her old commander had used that exact same move during his Agni Kai with Zuko. It was a surprisingly accurate mimicry. It would seem that Iroh has been teaching Zuko how to pick up his enemy's techniques as well. The longer he remains at large, the more dangerous he'll become. Yet Tanya's distraction had given Aela the time she needed to get into position at the top of the gangplank. Cold blue light began to flicker and flash across deck as she slowly swung her arms in wide circular motions, separating the positive and negative energy within herself and then bringing them crashing back together to generate lightning. As the electricity gathered together at the tips of her fingers she pointed down at Zuko's back. There was not enough space along the gangplank for Zuko to dodge it, nor any cover for him to hide behind. A lightning bolt through one leg would end the fight in a second. For a moment the world seemed to be illuminated in cold blue light as Aela unleashed the lightning bolt. Yet in the moment it had taken Aela to aim her attack, Iroh had moved to stand between her and Zuko, one arm raised to point at her and his body settled in a relaxed, unusually flowing stance. Aela's bolt howled forwards at impossible speeds and struck Iroh square in the hand. He's done for. Tanya realized. Lightning bolts had the power to split trees in half. Even if by some miracle he survived, he'd never move that arm again. Yet contrary to her expectations Iroh did not fall to the floor in a sizzling heap. The lighting seemed to crackle around his body, strong as ever yet for some reason not harming him. He brought his other arm up to point at Tanya, and a flash of cold panic raced through the Admiral's head as the realization of what he was doing struck her. He's figured out how to redirect lightning. There was a cold, steely glint in Iroh's eyes as he fixed his gaze upon her, and a heavy dread settled within Tanya's stomach as it dawned on her that she was staring into the eyes of death. Unlike during her battle with Admiral Zhang, she'd been caught mid-attack, too poorly positioned to move quickly enough to dodge a lightning bolt. Depending on where Iroh hit, she'd either be killed or crippled so badly she'd never fight again. This was the end. Yet Iroh's glare softened, and he adjusted the position of his arm ever so slightly. The lightning bolt burst out of his fingers and into the air, whizzing just above Tanya's shoulder and a hair's breadth away from her cheek, enough for a few stray sparks to tingle against her skin, before disappearing harmlessly into the clouds. He'd missed. Deliberately. Tanya was stunned, frozen by the near-death experience and the unexpected act of mercy. Aela too seemed taken aback by Iroh's unexpected ability to deflect lightning, but to her credit she didn't stay like that for long. As Iroh turned around to flee she stepped forward and unleashed a thin, piercing stream of blue fire, forcing Iroh to conjure his own barrier of fire to block it. Perhaps she was seeing things, or maybe Aela's blue flames were combining with Iroh's in weird ways, but Tanya could swear that there were flecks of a multitude of colors sparking through the flames of Iroh's shield. Run Zuko! Iroh shouted urgently, straining against Aela's onslaught. He'd been drained by his fight with Tanya and her soldiers, while Aela had primarily focused on evasion during her fight with Zuko and still had energy to spare. Not without you. Zuko shouted back, shooting worried glances back and forth between Iroh and the shoreline, where Tanya's soldiers were finally dragging themselves out of the ocean and moving to rejoin the fight. Family sticks together. Zuko. Iroh's tone was unusually sharp, brokering no arguments. Zuko looked back at his uncle, who was thoroughly pinned down by Agila's unrelenting torrent of flames. There was no way that he could move without breaking his shield and exposing both himself and Zuko to Agila's attack. Yet despite his precarious situation, Iroh was smiling gently at his nephew. Run! And so he did. With an expression of sheer pain, as if he was running across a bed of spikes, Zuko turned and ran towards the nearby forest. Tanya! Agila shouted fiercely, breaking the blonde out of her stunned state of inaction. She began to move on an interception course, but was forced back as a jet of Agila's blue fire burst up in her path. Wah! Agila! It was not Agila. Iroh had shifted his stance, diverting the blue flames breaking upon his barrier to flow up in Tanya's direction. No, you don't! He cries resolutely, the strain in his voice betraying how much pressure he was under. You let him go. Your fight is with me. Tanya looked back to where Zuko had almost reached the treeline. She could still move to chase after him, but what would be the point? More of her soldiers were still spread out across the woods, ready to catch whoever tried to escape. Shooting one last ugly scowl at the back of the banished prince, she turned around and landed at the bottom of the gangplank, trapping Iroh between her and Agila. The Dragon of the West was about to pay for making a fool of her. Zuko ran as if the hounds of hell were at his heels. He could hear the enraged cries of Fire Nation soldiers in the woods all around him, searching everywhere they could for any trace of him. One wrong step, one mistake, and he'd be captured, locked away in the darkest dungeon for the rest of his life. Is this how the Avatar felt when I was hunting him? No. No time for thinking about that now. Uncle had sacrificed his freedom to buy him time to escape, and Zuko would be damned if he wasted it. He shifted to the side, narrowly sidestepping a snare that he'd spotted just in the nick of time to avoid. The trees were crawling with Tanya's soldiers and traps, but by some small miracle enough of the torches were faulty enough to cast just enough shadows for Zuko to move through unseen. But where will I go? Where is there to run to? Nowhere. The entire world was enemy territory for him, and there were no allies left who'd come to his aid. He had no ship, no supplies, no uncle, nothing but the knife in his pocket. Never give up without a fight. Spirits, how he wished he could give up. Even his 2 years exiled at sea with a fresh scar on his face hadn't been as painful as this moment. But if he gave up now, everything would be over. If he could just get an audience with his father, he could explain what had happened at the North Pole, make him see that he and Uncle had only been acting in the Fire Nation's best interests. And there was only one way to earn an audience with his father. Capture the Avatar. Capture the Avatar and restore his honor. Capture the Avatar and save his nation. Capture the Avatar and free his uncle. It all came back to his one defining purpose, his destiny. His lungs were starting to burn with exhaustion, and so Zuko slowed down to a jog. As he did, the sounds of commotion up ahead caught his ears. Was that music? As he got closer, Zuko began to pick out the colorful shades of dozens of tents up ahead. As he emerged from the treeline, Zuko found himself on the outskirts of a small town that seemed to be in the middle of a festival. Now that he thought about it, the Masus had said there was a festival honoring Tanya's victory nearby. Maybe he could hide among the crowd and scavenge some supplies? He stepped forward to blend into the crowd, but hesitated as he noticed a poster pinned on a nearby building. An eye-watering amount of money was printed in big, bold letters at the very top, and below it an accurate rendition of his own scarred face. Wanted, ex-Prince Zuko. Dead or alive. Any and all information leading to the capture of this individual will be rewarded as appropriate. The posters were marked with the sigil of the Fire Nation Navy, leaving no mystery as to who had spread these bounty posters around. Damn it! Zuko slunk back away until he was well hidden behind the tent. With a feature as noticeable as his scar, he'd draw attention from anyone looking to make a quick few coins wherever he went. How was he supposed to get around undetected? Chapter 65. The posters were marked with the sigil of the Fire Nation Navy, leaving no mystery as to who had spread these bounty posters around. Damn it! Zuko slunk back away until he was well hidden behind the tent. With a feature as noticeable as his scar, he'd draw attention from anyone looking to make a quick few coins wherever he went. How was he supposed to get around undetected? With a frustrated grunt, he slammed his fist into the wall of the tent, but was surprised to feel something wooden clanking together on the other side. The flap at the back of the tent swung open from the force of his punch, giving him a peek at what lay inside. Masks. It was fairly common for masks to be sold at festivals, and any one of them would serve to hide the scar of his face. Thankfully whichever salesman was selling them was too occupied to have noticed his punch. Carefully Zuko peeled open the tent flaps again, taking a quick look at what masks were available. Immediately one in particular jumped out at him. Love Amongst the Dragons had never been the most popular play in the Fire Nation, but was old enough to be considered something of a classic, a pantomime that parents were expected to take their children to see at least once. To Zuko it was a play that held a certain sentimental significance. His mother had adored it, and had taken him and Aela to see it every year without fail up until her disappearance. He'd never really enjoyed the play, but there was one character he'd always found to be quite cool, the Blue Spirit, a mischievous trickster spirit whose antics humbled both heroes and villains alike. His mother had bought him a Blue Spirit mask one year, and he'd kept it with him even during his exile as a memento of better times. It was that mask that he'd worn back when he'd rescued the Avatar from Zhao's fortress, though it had been left back on his ship when he'd been forced to flee the North Pole on a raft. And a copy of that same mask stared back at him now, the sinister grin and wide eyes fixed across its face boring into him. Zuko had never been fond of spirits, but this felt like a sign. When he'd worn the mask of the Blue Spirit the first time he'd felt invincible. Prince Zuko was a failure who had been banished by his father, but the Blue Spirit was a master swordsman who could vanish into the shadows without a trace. There was a liberating sensation that had come with putting on the mask, knowing that he could define himself by his actions rather than the mistakes of his past. As a disguise went, the Blue Spirit was a bad idea. Although it wasn't as big as his real one, Zhao had put a bounty on the Blue Spirit's head after the incident at the fortress. If he took up that old persona once again he would attract attention from the very people he was trying to avoid. But then again the Blue Spirit had been able to sneak into the heart of a fully manned fortress without being caught. The Blue Spirit had been able to hold the Avatar at sword point. The Blue Spirit had been more successful than Zuko ever had been. Perhaps, as the Blue Spirit, he could finally do what Zuko could not. Capture the Avatar once and for all. Nobody was watching. All he had to do was reach out and take it, and the Blue Spirit would live again. Iroh just didn't make any sense. One moment he was fending off the combined might of Tanya, Aela, and a team of elite palace guards with the strength of a rampaging dragon. A storm of fire raged around him as he reflected any and every attack coming his way, lashing out with blasts of his own whenever anyone gave him the slightest opening. Yet the moment Zuko was out of sight he'd suddenly stopped, raising both hands and kneeling down in the universal gesture of surrender. He'd soon after been dogpiled by every soldier left to spare and wrapped up in so many chains that he looked like an avant-garde fashion statement, yet even then his peacefully neutral expression never wavered. Just to be certain, Tanya kept her eyes fixed firmly on him as he was dragged away into the brig of the ship, before twisting around to find the soldiers she'd left waiting in the trees to catch Zuko. The moment she spotted a flash of red armor among the trees her glare redoubled. "Report. Where is Zuko?" she snapped. "Apologies Admiral, there's been no sight of him," the soldier hurriedly replied. "We've been scouring for a mile around, but he's disappeared." "He's escaped?" Tanya hissed incredulously. "How?" She'd been so meticulous with her planning, but somehow Zuko had found a way to slip through the net. "Keep searching. Turn over every tree if you have to. I don't care what it takes, find me Zuko." "Yes Admiral," the soldier replied, snapping a quick salute before hurrying away. Tanya wrestled with the urge to bite her thumbnail in frustration. The Fire Lord would be furious when he found out that she'd let Zuko slip through her fingers just like the Avatar had. Yet he'd only get angrier if she tried to lie or make excuses for herself. Realizing that she had no choice but to face the music, Tanya stormed back to the ship. The moment she got there she sought out Aela, still waiting on the top deck, and threw herself into a low bow at the princess's feet. "I am so sorry Your Highness," she exclaimed, her head dipped so low towards the floor that it exposed the nape of her neck. "I have failed you. Zuko has managed to escape." Aela pursed her lips in annoyance. "Escaped? Tanya, you assured me that there was no chance of his escaping your formation. Aren't you supposed to be a military genius?" "I don't know how he did it," Tanya replied solemnly. "I beg you, Your Highness, please forgive me." Aela studied her with a cold, critical eye. "The Fire Nation does not forgive failures, Admiral," she eventually stated. Then she huffed and turned away. But the hunt is not over yet. Not by a long shot. Follow my orders to the letter, and there will be chances for you to redeem yourself. Once again, Tanya thanked her lucky stars that she'd been able to befriend someone like Aela. There weren't many superiors who'd let such a blunder go without some sort of consequence, even if Aela's reprimand made it clear that this was a one-time deal. Go and ensure that Iroh is properly confined below, then begin making preparations to set sail. Aela continued, giving her a dismissive wave of her hand. I need to go and plan our next move. Yes, Your Highness. Tanya answered, standing back up and giving Aela a respectful salute before marching off. She made a beeline straight to the lower decks, quickly reaching the brig where prisoners were detained. The jangle of keys alerted her that Iroh had just finished being locked in his cell by the time she arrived. Dismissed. She called out sharply to the guards, chasing them away with a glare until she and Iroh were alone. The moment they were, she slowly paced forwards until she was standing right in front of the cell door, staring through the bars down at the elderly man sitting on the floor. Iroh didn't have the look of a defeated man. Even sat on the cold, dusty floor, he seemed as serene and peaceful as a monk in meditation. He raised his eyes to look at her as she approached, and smiled. Zuko isn't with you? Good. He has escaped then. Tanya frowned. It's only a matter of time until we hunt him down. Don't be so sure. He is more resourceful than you may think. Tanya huffed derisively. Silence lingered between them, but Tanya made no move to say anything or leave. After a few seconds Iroh raised an eyebrow quizzically. You have a question? To her great shame Tanya found herself stuttering, the words she wanted to say strangely hard to force out as she warred with an inner reluctance to bring the topic up at all. You could have killed me. Iroh nodded sagely. I could. But you didn't. No. Why? It just didn't make sense. Tanya didn't think she was being arrogant to say that she was one of the biggest threats to Zuko. Killing her would have done a lot to keep him safe. Iroh let out a heavy sigh, seeming to almost visibly deflate for a second. If I'm being honest, to my great shame I considered it. Just for a second I was prepared to end your life. You have caused me more pain than I think you realize. Two of the wisest, dearest friends I have ever known, men who were there for me during the darkest hours of my life, lie dead by your hand. There was a moment where I reasoned that slaying you was the only sure way to prevent you from doing the same to Zuko. Then why didn't you? Iroh looked at her more intensely. Because when I look at you, do you know what I see? A powerful young firebender, with an incredible talent for the arts of war and the favor of the Fire Lord, devoting themselves to the belief that a victory for the Fire Nation will benefit the world. It is a story I know all too well. Iroh shifted, sitting just a little taller so that he was almost eye level with Tanya. I've been in your shoes. Once I was the great hero of our nation. Once I could have conquered a city that others said was impossible. Once I would have slain two wise, powerful masters who stood between me and what I thought was my destiny. Yet I turned away from that path. I realized the mistakes I would have been making before it was too late, and became a better man for it. He fixed Tanya with a stern, yet strangely pitying gaze. In you, I see a reflection on how my life would have been if I had made the wrong choices. I understand the reasons why you did what you have done, and I cannot help but sympathize. I do not believe that it is too late to help you realize the perils of the path you walk before the time comes for you to pay a terrible price, as I once did. A fierce scowl crossed Tanya's face. Don't act like you know me. I've lived through things you'd never believe. Challenged foes you'd cower before. We aren't the same. To her surprise Iroh replied with a smirk, his eyes twinkling with mirth, as if he was in on a secret joke. You'd be surprised. With a frustrated growl Tanya turned and stormed away, slamming the door behind her and leaving Iroh alone in the dark. He waited, listening carefully until the echoes of her footsteps faded into the distance, and then rolled over onto his stomach and placed the palms of his hands against the floor. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. He muttered to himself, then with a light grunt of exertion pushed himself up into a press-up. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 66. Leave us alone. Nearly a century of war had reaped a heavy toll on the Earth Kingdom. Whatever food and resources could be spared had been snapped up for the war effort, slowly but surely bringing poverty and famine to the land. With times so desperate, and most of the strong young men and women recruited for the front lines, crime flourished like rot across the continent. Traveling along the roads was just asking for trouble, but some people didn't have a choice. Caravans of refugees fleeing the towns recently conquered by the Fire Nation made easy prey for the bandit gangs. 7 men dressed in rags and furs, each brandishing a rusty yet sharp sword, surrounded an old wooden wagon pulled by an aged ox. Inside, 2 girls no older than 10 huddled fearfully into their mother's sides, her arms cradling them protectively as she prayed to whatever spirits might be listening for aid. The father stood by the ox, a pitchfork in hand and whatever courage he could muster gripping his chest, trying to scare the bandits off. Yet one scrawny farmer could do little to intimidate 7 armed thugs. "Looky here, lads. We've got ourselves a fighter." One of the bandits, the largest of the group with an old, mis-sized Earth Army chest plate strapped to his torso, laughed mockingly. "What are you gonna do, little guy?" The way the pitchfork shook in his hands betrayed that the farmer was a stranger to violence. When he couldn't so much as stammer together a reply, the bandit shot him an ugly sneer. "Pathetic. Don't know what I expected from a coward who isn't serving in the army. I don't see you on the front lines." The farmer stammered back. All traces of humor washed off the bandit's expression, replaced by pure, murderous intent. "What was that?" he hissed. "What are you trying to imply, little man? That you're the real coward?" The farmer replied, shoving his fear down as best he could and standing up to the thugs. "Times are hard for all of us, you know. We're all having to tighten our belts and give what we can to the war effort. We're all hungry. But we grit our teeth and do our best to make do." For a moment his trembling stopped, his anger igniting a desperate resolve, and he glared with true outrage at the leader. "But people like you, who turn on and steal from their fellow countrymen, rather than face the difficult work head-on, drag the Earth Kingdom down. You're all a group of leeches in human skin." The lesser bandits seemed momentarily taken aback by the display of courage, but not the leader. He stormed forwards, raising his crude blade high above his head and letting out a vicious, wordless snarl. The farmer raised his pitchfork to block, yet even he knew the simple tool would do little to stop the weight of hard metal. He heard his wife scream with terror as the sword came swinging down and closed his eyes, bracing himself for the pain. Yet it never came. Metal rang out against metal as the crude sword was intercepted by another, and the bandit leader's shocked grunt trailed off into a high-pitched wheeze as a foot crashed between his legs. He keeled over in pain, and a second later found his face planted directly into the dirt as a heavy weight perched upon his back and pushed him further down. The remaining bandits let out exclamations of fear and anger, and the farmer hesitantly opened his eyes again just a crack to take a peek at what had happened. A strange man was standing upon the bandit leader's back, using him like a podium to look down on the other bandits. He was clothed in plain, dusty brown robes, with pale skin and short black hair cropped close to his skull. In each hand he held an Ioedeo blade, cheap iron ones, yet sharp and obviously well cared for. Though he had his back to him, the farmer could see the edges of the blue mask he wore peeking around his cheeks. One of his daughters let out an odd gasp from the wagon, and as the stranger turned his head slightly to look at the source of the noise, the farmer caught sight of the mischievous, manic grin carved into the mask's face. "The blue spirit," he whispered reverently. Word traveled faster than horses, and for the past month rumors around these parts had told of a wanderer in a terrifying blue mask walking the road to Omashu, preying upon thieves and bandits. Wanted posters issued by the Fire Nation named him the Blue Spirit, and the price upon his head left no doubt that he was a dangerous individual. Some said he had slipped like a shadow through to the heart of a fully manned Fire Nation fortress all on his own, then fought his way out side by side with the Avatar. Others said that he was a spirit incarnate, here to seek revenge on the Fire Nation for their atrocities against the spirits. It sounded like a load of gossip and nonsense at the time, yet to see the masked man standing before him now, his posture straight yet relaxed in an almost regal display of confidence, the farmer couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to the rumors after all. With a wild cry one of the bandits lunged forward, swinging his blade in a wide arc. Yet the blue spirit parried with effortless ease, simply catching the sword with one of his own and lazily spinning it around in a half-circle that forced the bandit to let go or twist his wrist. The discarded sword flew through the air towards another bandit, causing him to dive out of the way and onto the dusty ground. 2 more bandits came in together, each from an opposite direction, and stabbed towards the blue spirit's torso. Yet the blue spirit spun on his heel, digging it further into the bandit leader's back and making him groan in pain. Both of his swords snaked out to each deflect one of their swords just enough to miss him, yet did nothing to arrest the momentum of the charging men. Then, with a sprightly backflip, he leapt off the bandit leader's back and spun over one of the charging bandits' heads. The 2 bandits collided into each other face first, and tumbled down to collapse in a heap upon their own leader. Only 3 armed bandits remained, and after seeing their fellows be taken apart so easily for their recklessness, they approached cautiously, spreading out to surround the Blue Spirit in a triangle formation. The Blue Spirit gave his swords a lazy twirl and lowered his stance, settling into a pose that reminded the farmer of a tiger waiting to pounce. When it became clear that he was waiting for them to make the first move, the 3 bandits charged in unison. It was obvious that these 3 were used to working together. Their weapons were crude and their forms sloppy, but they all followed a rhythm that could only be born from fighting side by side many times. The Blue Spirit's blades snaked out to counter each of their strikes, yet before he could counterattack he was forced to intercept another strike from a different direction. Added to the fact that he held his swords with only one hand, whilst the bandits held theirs with 2, and it became clear even to the untrained eye that the Blue Spirit would not be able to keep up the pace for long. Yet the Blue Spirit himself did not acknowledge this. A minute passed, then 2, and yet the Nyoedeo blades continued to whirl around him like a hurricane of steel. Whether through stamina or pure tenacity, the masked man's arms never lost their strength. It was the bandits who grew tired first, their swords slowing with each swing as a lack of proper training and poor nutrition caught up with them. Eventually the strikes came slowly enough that the Blue Spirit spotted an opportunity. With a jolt he threw himself down to squat under a swing from behind to decapitate him, his sword still extended out like wings to lock down the other bandits' blades. The attacker, who'd grown used to the feel of his blade being deflected, overextended and stumbled forward at the lack of resistance, and the Blue Spirit leapt up like a jumping frog to headbutt him beneath the chin without even turning to look at him. A bony crunch rang out as the bandit's teeth clacked together, and he dropped his weapon to stagger back, cradling his possibly broken chin in his hands. Now only 2 remained, and those odds were far more favorable for a master of the twin swords. Advancing on them like a leopard stalking its prey, the Blue Spirit lashed out, forcing them both back, and quickly pounced on one before the other could regain his footing. He brought the flat sides of his swords to clap against both of the bandits' ears simultaneously, disorienting the man's sense of balance so badly he fell to the floor like a drunkard, and turned to the second, spinning his blades in a quick flourish. The last bandit looked around at his defeated comrades, looked back to the Blue Spirit, then promptly ran for his life. Some of the earlier bandits were starting to recover, but it was clear that all the fight had been scared out of them, and all they dared to do was take their more recently fallen comrades and shuffle away as hurriedly as possible. When they were all gone, the Blue Spirit brought his swords together into one and carefully slid them into the sheath on his back. He turned back to the road, fully intending to walk away, but let out a small yelp of surprise as he was suddenly glommed by a pair of arms around his leg. "Thank you. Thank you so much." One of the farmer's daughters gushed, hugging his leg as if it was the pillar holding up the sky. They were gonna and was. "What my daughter means to say," interjected the farmer, stepping forward to place a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. His voice still had a little shake to it as the after effects of fear shook his system, but he powered on through. "Is that we owe you a debt we can never repay, Blue Spirit. Please accept our most humble thanks, and know what we will do whatever we can, however small, to repay you." The Blue Spirit froze, the rigidity of his posture suggesting that he was unsure of himself, and the farmer idly wished he could see what sort of expression the young man wore beneath his mask. At last the Blue Spirit shook his head. "Oh come now, surely there must be something we can do for you," the farmer's wife insisted, coming to join them with their second daughter cradled protectively in her arms. "The road is long, and you carry no supplies. Surely we can at least share some food and a cup of water with you? What little we have becomes all the bigger when it is shared with good company." Despite the mask, it was pretty obvious that the Blue Spirit was finding the whole situation a little awkward. The girl clamped around his leg like an anchor prevented him from running away, and it was hard to ignore the farmer's family when they looked at him with such honest gratitude. Eventually he resigned himself to defeat and nodded slowly. Chapter 67. Tanya looked around at the array of colorful tents with the pinched, ever so slightly sour expression of someone trying very, very hard not to judge someone else for their poor life choices. "You know Aela?" She began slowly, shooting a quick glance over to her friend, and finding a small measure of relief in the fact that she wore a similar expression. "When you said that Tai Li ran off to join the circus, I didn't think you meant it quite so literally. A good friend was supposed to respect their friends' life choices and support them, no matter how ill-advised said life choices may be, and Tanya really did want to be a good friend to Tai Li. Yet, to her shame, no matter how many times she told herself that, yes, Tai Li should do what she loves, and of course, Tai Li is a responsible young lady who has the right to make her own choices. A large and very loud part of her wanted nothing more than to drag her wayward friend back home, place her under house arrest and have a long talk about acceptable career choices. Tai Li was the daughter of a noble, and one of the closest friends of the heir to the throne. She was also a master of chi blocking, one of the few martial arts capable of bridging the power gap between benders and non-benders, during a time period where the Fire Nation would bend over backwards for more soldiers capable of combating bending armies. Opportunity had quite literally thrown itself at her feet. She could open a dojo, get paid a king's ransom to spend 3 hours a day teaching a select few students her moves, and buy her own private circus if she enjoyed it as a hobby so much. All it would take was a little more wisdom than her childhood friend seemed to possess. Aela did not sigh in response, for it was not dignified for a princess to do so in public, but the flash of weariness across her gaze betrayed that they were thinking along the same wavelength. Well, you know Tai. Any chance to set herself apart from her sisters, she'll snap up in a heartbeat. She shot her a snide glare. It didn't help that you never once failed to mistake her sisters for her whenever we visited their house. Tanya groaned in exasperation. Tai Li's complex about standing out as an individual among her 7 identical sisters was a cause of all sorts of headaches. She's not still upset about that, is she? In my defense, they all have the exact same hairstyle, wear the exact same style of clothes, and act the exact same way as each other. She paused, then tapped her chin thoughtfully. Except for that one who's kind of a bitch. Which one was that again? Tai Wu. Yeah, that's the one. My point is, couldn't she have tried a new look or something before skipping straight to running away from home? Aela frowned sternly. You would think so. After I heard that she'd gone, I asked myself why I hadn't spotted the warning signs earlier. I could have talked to her, reminded her that her place will always be by my side, and disabused her of these silly ideas before they could take root. Tanya's eyes widened as the realization struck her. Of course, how could she be so blind? A good friend would support you in your bad decisions, but a true friend was one who wasn't afraid to sit you down, talk to you, and help you realize when you were making a mistake, even if it wasn't what you wanted to hear. That Aela had realized such almost instinctively was just another sign of what an amazing friend she was. Do you think we'll be able to get her to see sense? She asked, willing to follow Aela's lead when it came to deal with social matters. Aela's reply was a sharp, predatory smirk. Oh, don't you worry. I know just how to enlighten our old friend. Okay, because that didn't sound at all ominous. Aela really must have been spending too much time learning from her father in recent years. Did all Fire Lords teach their heirs how to speak like they were foreshadowing something? Before Tanya could ask for elaboration, Aela strode off with the unspoken expectation that she was to follow her. It didn't take much searching before they spotted their target. Her acrobatic friend had grown a little since she'd last seen her, but otherwise Tai Li was just as she remembered her, radiating cheerful, energetic, and unfailingly positive vibes like some kind of sunshine and rainbow-styled lightbulb. Her hair was still braided into the ponytail she and her sisters always wore, though she seemed to have switched up her old, more reserved, noble's clothes for the simpler apparel of a tightrope walker, albeit with enough of the shirt cut away to expose her midriff. Tai Li, could that possibly be you? Aela called out, and Tai Li's head shot around to look at them, splitting into a wide grin. Aela. Tanya. A spin and a flip later, and Tanya let out an off as Tai Li crashed into them both with the force of an intercontinental missile. Oh right, how silly of her to forget how much of a hugger Tai was. It is so good to see you too. Tai Li gushed into their shoulders, before taking a step back. Please, Aela replied. Don't let us interrupt your... She raised a critical eyebrow at their surroundings. Whatever it is you were doing. Tai Li, still smiling, fell casually back into a backflip that ended with her lying on her stomach, one foot hovering over her head, the other pointed up at the sky. Tanya cleared her throat. Listen, Tai, it really is good to see you again. Though I can't help but wonder at why we found you. She too glanced around at the circus. Here of all places. Indeed. Aela continued. Certainly our parents didn't send us to the Royal Fire Academy for girls to end up in places like this. Nearby, a platypus bear let out a low groan and sat up, revealing that it had just laid an egg on the ground. Aela shot the dirty beast a quick look of disgust, while Tai Li seemed happy for it. Tanya, however, looked mildly alarmed, as she questioned who in their right minds was letting a pregnant bear wander around the camp unrestrained. That was a workplace hazard just waiting to happen. I have a proposition for you. Aela continued. I'm hunting a traitor. You remember my cowardly brother, don't you? Ty Lee grinned at a memory. Oh yeah. He was so sweet. Tanya snorted. He's grown up a little since those days. And not in good ways. The corner of Aela's mouth curled upwards slightly. We would be honored if you would join me on my mission. A complicated look, somewhere between distraught fear and flat-out panic, flashed across Ty's face for a second. Oh, I would love to. She did not, by any stretch of the imagination, sound like she would love to, but it would have been in poor taste to call her out on it. But the truth is, I'm really happy here. I mean, my aura has never been pinker. Tanya raised an eyebrow in confusion. Pink means she's happy, Tanya. Aela translated. Oh, I see. She did not see at all, but she'd long resigned herself to the fact that she'd always have no idea what all the aura talk was supposed to mean. But Ty, surely you can appreciate how fortunate we were to study at the world's foremost school, when most people don't have the opportunity to get a formal education at all. I understand wanting to follow your passion, but surely there's a way to reconcile it with a more economically beneficial profession. Ty Lee looked confused. What? She means that you should get a real job. Aela translated. I wouldn't put it quite so bluntly. Tanya added hastily, shooting Aela a quick scowl at the flicker of hurt that crossed Ty Lee's face. I just think that it's a waste to not use your education to aim for a position with a bit more financial security. You know, theater companies that target more elite audiences have been adopting elements of circus into their acts recently. You could be the leading lady of the Royal Opera House with our support. I'm sure you could even be running the place after a few years. But Ty Lee didn't seem like she was considering Tanya's words. In fact, each one seemed to just make her more uncomfortable. I don't know, Tanya, it's just not the same. I want to travel the world and have people cheer for me. It's about the joy, you know? Money and status, that's just not me. Not me? How could money not be for anyone? Fiscal wisdom was an essential skill for anyone living in a world of currency and trade. Money bought you food, shelter, and all the other basic necessities of life. It was the chrysalis of human effort itself. Even the most tortured artists sold their paintings to secure their next meal. Tanya was not suggesting that Ty Lee needed to be some money-grubbing fat cat, but if she could just get her head out of this teenage wanderlust phase, she'd surely come to see that. We'll take your word for it. Aela suddenly cut in, interrupting Tanya's train of thought. I wouldn't want you to give up the life you love just to please me. Thank you, Aela. Ty replied, respectfully bowing to the princess. At the same time Tanya looked at her like she'd just declared her intention to transform the Fire Nation into a hippie communist state. But Aela did not acknowledge Tanya's look of betrayal. Instead she smirked to herself. Of course, before we leave, we're going to catch your show. Chapter 68. You don't talk much, Mr. Blue Spirit. Are you mute? Zuko nodded his head awkwardly, inwardly feeling a little guilty for lying to a child. His voice worked fine, but it served his purposes better to be known as a mute when donning this alias. Though the chances of some Earth Kingdom peasant recognizing who he was by voice alone was close to impossible, paranoia warned Zuko to distance his two identities wherever he could. Besides, he'd yet to say a word whenever he wore the blue spirit mask before, and staying silent felt right somehow. I'm sorry to hear that. The young girl's mother replied sympathetically, pouring clean water from her canteen into the cup set before him. No doubt she assumed he'd been injured in the war. The moment Zuko's cup was full again, the little girl resumed her onslaught of innocent questions. Hey, where did you learn to fight like that? It was so cool. You were all like Fwa. And then they were all like yeah. All right sweetheart, that's enough. The farmer interjected, placing a hand atop her head to settle her as she began to mime swing a pair of swords around. Though I agree that your swordsmanship was a sight to behold. With skills like that, I suppose you must be heading to Omashu to aid the rebellion. Zuko tilted his head to the side questioningly. A rebellion? He knew nothing about that. He was heading towards Omashu because, the last time he'd been around that area, he'd picked up word that the Avatar had been a guest of the Mad King Bumi for a while. When the Avatar left the North Pole he'd seek out an earthbending teacher next, and King Bumi was known to be one of the best. You didn't know? The farmer shook his head sadly. Then I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. The Fire Nation has fully occupied the city. There was no siege, no struggle, they were allowed to simply march straight in and take over. We're from Omashu ourselves actually, one of the lucky few who the rebellion was able to slip out in time. Now Governor Yukino is in full control. Yukino. Mai's father. Did that mean Mai was in the city too? The farmer reached into his pocket and held out a wooden medallion. It was hexagonal in shape, with a few lines carved into it to form a simple yet stylish outline of a badger. Here, take this. It's a rebellion amulet. Take this to the Gritty Crown restaurant and hand it to one of the staff, and you'll be granted an audience with a member of the rebellion. Whatever business you have in Omashu, I'm sure they can help you out in exchange for a little assistance. Zuko took the medallion and tucked it away in his pocket. He'd always been fond of Mai, but he couldn't trust her family nor the other soldiers occupying the city not to turn him over to Aela. If the Avatar did pass through Omashu though, there was a good chance that this rebellion would notice. They'd be a good source of information if nothing else. One conversation, one performance, and one flaming net later, Ty Lee had joined the party. Tanya was not happy. That was in violation of several important health and safety laws. She ranted at Aela, who was deliberately keeping her eyes fixed ahead with a look of forced nonchalance on her face. And, more than that, it was downright dangerous. What if she had fallen? Honestly, Tanya, do you really have such little faith in your friends? Aela replied dismissively. Ty Lee is the best acrobat we know. She'd have never done something as amateur as fall off a simple tightrope. That doesn't excuse putting her in danger. Accidents can always happen, even to the most skilled professionals. Relax. She would have said something if she didn't think she could handle it. Isn't that right, Ty Lee? Of course, Aela. Came the chipper voice of Ty Lee from behind them. And it did make the performance even more exciting. I never needed the net anyway. There was no sign whatsoever that the flaming net had bothered her even slightly, and that was reason enough to cause Tanya's anger to stall. What if she really was making a big deal out of nothing after all? Both Aela and Ty were acting like the flaming net wasn't even worth mentioning, and employees in her original world had always been griping about how unnecessarily anal health and safety regulations were. Perhaps her concerns came from the mindset of the human resources manager she'd once been, and didn't really match up with the mindset of the people in her current world. Even so, the memory of the flames spreading across the ropes still sat uncomfortably in her stomach. If we are to be successful in our mission, we must strive to be as efficient as possible. Tanya grit out in clipped tones, reining in her anger through force of will. If emotions would not serve her here, then cold, clinical professionalism would. We cannot afford to risk the health of one of our best assets, no matter how small the risk, for the sake of entertainment. Now Aela scowled, a small, pursed tightness around her lips and eyes. Strange. I could have sworn that I was the one appointed as commander of this mission, not you. I believe that means I can take whatever risks I deem appropriate. You are in command here, but your father appointed me as your subordinate so that I could advise you. Advice? Aela snapped, suddenly whirling around to face her. You think that I need advice, do you? That I'm not clever enough to succeed without the help of the oh-so-mighty Moon Slayer? Oh come on. Aela had to know that was not how she meant it. She was being deliberately stubborn. Hints of frustration began to seep into Tanya's tone as her self-control started to slip. You are a genius, Aela, and were this a matter of politics I would happily default to you. But this is a military operation, and though you are well studied, you don't yet have the experience I do. Seeking wisdom from subordinates more specialized than you is. Girls, girls. Kmen, break it up. Ty Lee interjected, popping up like the world's most cheerful jack-in-the-box between them. I finally get to see you both again after so long. Let's not ruin this moment by arguing. The sudden interruption gave Tanya's brain to catch up with her mouth, and with a jolt of panic she realized just how close she'd come to yelling at the crown princess. Friend or not, that was a line one should not cross lightly. Taking a literal step back from the argument, Tanya cleared her throat awkwardly. Yes, quite right. My apologies to both of you. That was rather ill-mannered of me. Aela took a noticeable breath herself before rebuilding her ironclad expression of calm confidence once more. Indeed. I apologize too. I should not have said what I did. It wasn't her words that Tanya felt needed apologizing for, but it was in poor taste to break the metaphorical olive branches they'd extended to each other. Aela turned and walked away, likely to sort out their transportation to Omashu, leaving Tanya and Tai Li alone. Again, I am sorry for that shameful display. Tanya began as she looked at Tai Li. Your performance was fascinating to watch. Tai Li giggled. Thank you. I came up with the routine myself. She launched herself at Tanya in a big, smothering hug, which Tanya awkwardly reciprocated with a couple of awkward pats on the back. And you? Youngest admiral in history. Conqueror of the North. That's amazing. I can't take all the credit. Tanya replied, fighting herself not to preen under the praise. Oh, right. Tai Li broke the hug, but her hand slid over to Tanya's shoulders, and she looked her in the eyes sympathetically. I'm sorry about what happened to Admiral Zhao. I know you respected him a lot. Yes. Tanya's voice came out as little better than a whisper, and she suddenly found that she could not bear to keep eye contact with Tai. It wasn't that she regretted killing Zhao, there had been a monster in him that she couldn't believe she hadn't seen right from the beginning. But how was she supposed to explain to one of her best friends that she'd got to where she was now by committing treason? By murdering a man she'd once respected in cold blood and framing a 10-year-old? Aela understood the necessity of such things, and hadn't needed to be told anyway, but Tai Li was far more innocent. Even if she wouldn't tell anyone, she would no doubt be horrified. I do sometimes find myself wondering if I could have saved him, if I'd only been there a little faster. No, Tanya, don't say that. It's not your fault. Tai Li replied comfortingly, mistaking her guilt for sorrow. The Avatar is the only one to blame. Tanya's smile did not quite sit right on her lips. Of course. You're right. The silence between them stretched on a little too long for comfort. Tanya awkwardly cleared her throat. So, you've changed your mind about joining us. As questionable as Aela's methods were, they seemed to have served their purpose of helping Tai Li really think about the direction her life was headed. Yes. I thought a little bit more about what you said earlier. Tai replied with her usual smile. Perhaps there is no escaping my place in the Fire Nation after all. Escaping? Not exactly the word Tanya would have used, but it was close enough. All things, be they companies, militaries, or even nations, had a hierarchy, and rebelling against it was so much more wasteful than acknowledging and trying to climb it. You know, I don't think I've ever seen you and Aela argue like that before. Is everything all right? Tai Li asked. A resigned sigh slipped out of Tanya's nose. Truthfully? Things have been a little tense recently. Aela wants this mission to go perfectly, and has been a little more controlling than usual to make it happen. She thought about mentioning that Aela's desire for total control was her way ensuring Zuko would not be hurt, but decided to keep that card close to her chest for now. It wasn't her place to go around revealing Aela's private thoughts. I've been doing my best to accommodate her, but it's starting to get a little tiring. Tai Li gave her a sympathetic look. Maybe you should talk to her? I know you two will be able to figure something out. Sometimes it's like you're cut from the same cloth. Perhaps. Tanya nodded. But not right now. Our next destination is Omashu, to invite Mai along. I think a few comforts of civilization is just what we'll need to reach an equitable agreement. Chapter 69. So, is King Bumi with you guys? Is he leading the resistance? Omashu had not quite been what Ong had been hoping for since he arrived. First had come the shock of finding out that it had been captured by the Fire Nation. Then, in an attempt to save a lady from falling boulders, he'd been mistaken for a member of the resistance and had knives thrown at him. And all the time he still had no idea what had happened to the only friend he had left from before his big freeze. Jung, the leader of the resistance, angrily clenched his fists. Of course not. The day of the invasion, we readied ourselves for battle. We were prepared to defend our city, to fight for our lives and for our freedom. But before we even had a chance. A deep growl thrummed in the back of his throat, his expression morphing into a rictus of frustrated fury. King Bumi surrendered. Surrendered? Bumi? No, there must be some mistake. Bumi loved his city. He wouldn't sit back and let it fall into enemy hands without a word. The day of the invasion, I asked King Bumi what he wanted to do. Jung continued, sensing his disbelief. He looked me in the eye and said, I'm going to do nothing. Sokka and Katara stirred uncomfortably behind him, no doubt recalling how Bumi had imprisoned them in Kandy the last time they'd visited as part of a game. Ong didn't need to look at them to know that they believed it. Bumi was a little crazy, yes, but not completely insane. There had to be a reason for what he'd done. Jung snorted derisively. It doesn't matter now. Fighting the Fire Nation is the only path to freedom. And freedom is worth dying for. Freedom. The core principle of airbending. Ong had a great respect for freedom, and valued it immensely, but the way Jung spoke of sacrificing lives for it so easily didn't sit well with him. As noble as it was to risk your life for a cause you believed in, such a sacrifice should always be the very last resort. Actually, there's another path to freedom. He said calmly. You could leave Omashu. You're directing all your energy to fight the Fire Nation, but you're outnumbered. You can't win. Now's the time to retreat, so you can live to fight another day. Jung looked like he wanted to slam his hand against something. You don't understand. They've taken our home, and we have to fight them at any cost. I don't know, Jung, living to fight another day is starting to sound pretty good to me. One of the resistance members piped up softly. Yeah, I'm with the kid. Another agreed more forcefully. Whispers erupted through the underground tunnels as the gathered resistance members began discussing amongst themselves, and though Ong could not pick out any particular conversation, the lack of aggression in the crowd's tone suggested that most agreed with him. Jung looked back to him with a frown, clearly annoyed at being undermined, yet mature enough to not throw a tantrum or insist that his orders be followed. Fine. But there are thousands of citizens that need to leave. How are we going to get them all out? Suckers. All eyes turned to the source of the outburst, Sokka. The young water tribe man had a wide, devious grin on his face. You're all about to come down with a nasty case of pentapox. Please tell me you're here to kill me. Aela stared at Mai with a raised eyebrow. Mai stared back, her expression perfectly deadpan. Then, on some unspoken cue, the slight smiles cracked on both their faces. It's great to see you, Mai. Aela said, stepping forward to place her hands on Mai's shoulders, only to quickly remove them when Ty Lee bounded forward and enveloped Mai in a huge, boneless hug. Mai patted her back with one hand with the look of someone who'd become resigned to such grandiose hugs long ago. I thought you ran off and joined the circus. You said it was your calling. Well, Aela and Tanya called a little louder. Ty Lee replied chipperly as she released her. Mai cocked an eyebrow and looked around. Tanya's here too? Where is she? She got a little distracted on the way here. Ty Lee replied sheepishly. Strange, Tanya was never what she would have called an easily distracted person. What could have captured her attention? As if sensing her thoughts, Aela stepped past them and led the way out onto the palace balcony. Perhaps you'd better see for yourself. She called, pointing out towards the courtyard below. Mai followed behind her and peered over the railings. A horde of peasants shambled towards the gates, moaning and groaning with glassy eyes and outstretched arms. Even from so high up, Mai could see huge red splotches dotting their skin in irregular patterns. Plague! Plague! Some of the Fire Nation soldiers were shouting fearfully, hurrying around trying to contain the infected civilians whilst also keeping a wide distance away from them. Mai spotted her father on the scene, surrounded by a ring of guards and flapping his hands around animatedly as he tried to gain control of the situation. Drive them out of the city! He shouted, but don't touch them. We have to rid the city of this disease. Belay that order. Ah, there was that familiar tussle of gold hair. Tanya was hovering above the crowd like a miniature star, fire blazing at her feet as she observed the situation from above. Keep the gates closed. Direct all infected to Kyoaksun Hill, we'll use it as a quarantine zone until the plague has passed. We can't keep them here. Yukino protested. What if it spreads across the city? We'll all be in danger. If we let them leave, the infection will spread across the entire Earth Kingdom. Which, as you may have noticed, we are currently trying to conquer. Tanya shot back acidly. Better this be confined here than be allowed out into the wider world. The Fire Nation soldiers on the ground looked around awkwardly, stuck between their duty to obey an admiral and their own desire to not get infected. Sensing their hesitation, Tanya fixed them with a cold glare. I swear to Agni, if one of you opens the gate so much as a crack, I'll have you hung, drawn, and quartered faster than you can say pentapox. Compared with certain death at the legendary admiral's hands, suddenly pentapox didn't seem quite so dangerous anymore. The soldiers snapped to work, using their spears like shepherd's staffs to literally herd the infected down another street, while Tanya took charge of directing them. As perfect a soldier as ever I see. Mai drawled. Indeed. Aela replied, a hint of venom lacing her tone. She's grown very comfortable throwing her rank around. Slowly but surely the crowd of infected began to thin out from the courtyard as more of them were siphoned away to the quarantine zone. Mai's father and his guard began to retreat back to the palace, and once the local guards seemed to have full control of the situation, Tanya broke away and flew over to join him as they entered through the palace doors. As the sounds of their raised, arguing voices drew closer, Aela led her and Ty Lee back inside to sit at a nearby table just as the door burst open. Strange about it. I've heard about it before. One of my guard's brothers caught pentapox. Yukino yelled. I understand that. What I'm saying is that it's strange for this disease to suddenly pop up so quickly, and here of all places. Tanya fired back. What's that supposed to mean? The reformation of Omashu is going perfectly. That's the problem. It's all been going too perfectly. I've fought earthbenders plenty of times, and if nothing else I have to admit that they're stubborn bastards. I've never heard of them surrendering territory without putting up at least a token resistance before. Yet here, in the second most defensible city in the Earth Kingdom, the Fire Nation was allowed to just waltz in and take over without any problems. It doesn't make sense. Bah! You're being paranoid. Well, I wouldn't say that there haven't been any problems. Mai interrupted blithely. Tanya finally looked away from Yukino, and her expression softened as she lay eyes on her final childhood friend. Mai! It's good to see you again. She approached, all thoughts of Omashu temporarily pushed aside. And you look so dignified. Life in the colonies has been good to you. I have been bored out of my mind every second. Mai deadpanned. If you want to swap jobs, I'm game. Tanya let out a quick laugh, mistakenly seeming to think that she was joking. However, it quickly turned serious again. What were you saying before? There's been problems in Omashu. A rebellion. Mai explained. A minor rebellion. Yukino butted in. Nothing serious. Just a few angry peasants throwing a few rocks around. The city guard has it perfectly under control. Tanya did not look impressed. Perhaps so. But I'm pretty sure that any signs of an active rebellion cell, no matter the size, should be reported to military intelligence. I don't recall seeing Omashu on the map of potential insurrection sites. There's no rebel cell here. Just a gang or two of angry teens. Why, the last one we saw wasn't even a teenager yet. Just some little bald child. Tanya went ramrod straight in an instant, her face stricken with panic. In a flash she whirled around to point at Yukino. What? Bring me whoever witnessed this attack. She demanded. That would be me. Mai cut in. Did the perpetrator have blue arrows tattoos on his head and hands? Mai raised an eyebrow curiously. Airbender tattoos? I couldn't see, the sun was in my eyes. What about his clothes? Were they orange-colored? And was he holding a wooden staff? Mai thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yes. Tanya's face morphed into a horrible scowl. It's him. He's here. Aela was the first to catch on. The Avatar? You think he's here in Omashu? But why? Chapter 70. Mai thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yes. Tanya's face morphed into a horrible scowl. It's him. He's here. Aela was the first to catch on. The Avatar? You think he's here in Omashu? But why? Good question. Could his appearance be related to the outbreak of this plague? Tanya seemed to lose herself in thought, pacing back and forth as her mind worked to connect the dots. King Bumi's surrender, airbender tactics, chemical warfare. Oh. Oh. Suddenly Tanya darted over to the wall, when a large map of the city hung proudly, and ripped it off. Before Yukino could protest, she draped it across the table and began to furiously scan the layout of the city as if the secrets of the world were hidden across it. Just as Ty Lee was about to ask what she was doing, Tanya stepped back and shouted out loud. Guerrilla warfare. What? Aela questioned, looking over at Mai, who just shrugged. Ty Lee gasped. Like elephant gorillas. You think the rebels are training animals to fight? No. Gorilla, not girl, forget it. Tanya huffed, pushing the map aside and slamming her hands down on the table dramatically. Tell me, what has made the Fire Nation so successful during our invasion of the Earth Kingdom? Our national pride. Yukino declared proudly. No. Tanya replied sharply. Serious answers only please. Our superior numbers, tactics, and technological advances. Aela answered. Tanya nodded approvingly. Exactly right. We excel at offensive strategies just as much as the Earth Kingdom excels as defensive strategies. Our war machines allow us to counteract the fortifications and other defenses of their cities. With those things balancing each other out, our superior numbers allow us to prevail in most conflicts. Tanya began to pace again, this time circling around the table. The majority of our battles against the Earth Kingdom have followed a simple pattern. Our armies arrive at a city and begin a siege, the Earth Kingdom holds its defenses for as long as it can, and both sides whittle away at each other until there are no earthbenders left, and the Fire Nation breaks through. Why is that relevant to Omashu? Mai asked blankly. They surrendered without a fight. Tanya shook her head. No, Mai. I don't think they did. The others looked at her with puzzled expressions, so Tanya ceased her pacing and returned to the table. Most earthbenders would be too stubborn to abandon their defenses, but King Bumi is no ordinary earthbender. He's well known for being insane, and that makes him capable of thinking of strategies outside of conventional earthbender tactics. Tactics using Omashu's natural defenses not as a wall, but as a coffin. A coffin? Yukino echoed, concern lacing his tone. Picture this. You are the Mad King Bumi. You look out across your walls one day to see a Fire Nation army of such numbers that your city could never hope to repel it. You could marshal your men, ready your city for a siege, but you already know that you are just stubbornly holding out against the inevitable. Then suddenly a thought crosses your mind. That army is here to invade your city now, but once they succeed then the majority of them will then march away to the next city in need of conquering, leaving a smaller garrison behind in an unfamiliar location who are well trained at attacking cities, but not so experienced at defending one. Aela was the first to catch on. You think he's planning a counter-attack? Yes. If Omashu surrendered then what, I ask, happened to their army? Rather than let his men be worn away day after day at the walls, Bumi orders his generals to take their men and go to ground, probably quite literally. A full army of well-trained, healthy soldiers with a clear chain of command, all disappearing among the local populace or hiding beneath the ground, waiting for the invaders of their homes to raise their flags and march off on their next great conquest. Tanya pointed to the map where the newly formed quarantine zone was located. This pentapox outbreak is just the opening act. I suspect that King Bumi arranged for the Avatar to come to this city and release the pentapox virus into the local populace as a means of spreading chaos. With an infection spreading around, pressure will be on us and the local garrison to maintain order and prevent its spread. Soldiers will be stretched thin maintaining checkpoints and patrolling the streets, and that will leave them vulnerable. Tanya leaned further over the table, her tone growing slower and darker, as if she were telling a horror story around a campfire. It will begin with ambushes, like the one that targeted Mai. Patrols out at night will find themselves attacked by larger gangs of Earthbender soldiers, crushed by overwhelming numbers and the element of surprise. The attackers flee back underground before reinforcements can arrive, leaving the corpses on the streets as a message of fear. Once the patrols have been thinned out enough that guards have to be reassigned from important positions, next comes the sabotage of food stores, military equipment and all the other supplies that give us the advantage in combat. Then come the assassinations of those high up the chain of command or in important positions, captains, tacticians, even the local governor and his family. Yukino gulped heavily. Fear kept the population in line before, but now, with the Fire Nation garrison scared and disorganized, that fear starts to turn to resentment. They blame the Fire Nation for the spread of the pentapox, and rally behind the banner of the legendary Avatar. Protests begin, easily turned violent by a few stray rocks from a rebel, and as the weakened garrison struggles to maintain order the Omashu army finally steps out of the shadows, crushing the garrison while they are at their weakest. King Bumi is freed, the city returns to his control, and the army is celebrated as heroes even as all those who helped the Fire Nation occupation are hung from the palace walls. By the spirits Yukino breathed, sounded utterly terrified, and already defeated. Wah! What can we do? Tanya straightened back up and turned to the governor, standing as every inch the admiral she was. Do not fear, governor. A rebellion is itself like an infection. Leave it too long and it will spread, consuming you from within, but if you act quickly and decisively it can be easily dealt with. Do not hesitate to cut off the infected limb, and the infection is beaten in an instant. Yukino looked down nervously. I'm not sure I can. No matter. It's not in your hands anymore. Tanya interrupted, her tone laced with the commanding tone of authority. As admiral, I am exercising my right to place any city I believe to be at risk of rebellion under military lockdown. As of this moment, all military and administrative personnel are under my direct command. All civilians working non-essential jobs are to be confined to their homes or the quarantine zones, and all commanding officers are to report to me immediately for reassignment. You, Governor, and your family shall remain in protective custody here in the palace. Mai coughed meaningfully. With the exclusion of your daughter, until such a time as the rebellion has been dealt with. I expect it to be over within a few days. Yukino gaped at her like a fish out of water. What are you going to do? Tanya's lips peeled back into a wolfish, snarling grin. First I will find whatever cave the rebels are hiding and excise them from this city, burning away the disease until Omashu is pure once more. Then I will finish what I started at the North Pole. A flash of red-hot anger gleamed in her eyes. I will trap the Avatar within this city, and I will destroy him once and for all. Chapter 71. Sokka was upset. He knew he had a tendency to mess things up fairly frequently, but one thing he'd always had confidence in was his plans. Aang and Katara could bend the elements to their will and fight off dozens of firebenders, but it was his ideas that got them out of the sticky situations they found themselves in more often than not. Not today though. Just as everything seemed like it was about to work out, that she-devil came swooping in like a bat out of hell. It was a small mercy that she hadn't spotted them amidst the crowd. The moment he'd seen her, Sokka was filled with the urge to storm up and throw his boomerang right at her face. After everything she'd done to you and the North Pole, she deserved a little suffering of her own. Yet Katara had held him back, and they'd slipped into the quarantine zone among the fake infected, and then back to the rebellion headquarters through a secret tunnel. It wouldn't be long before someone noticed that the pentapox spots were fading from their victims rather rapidly, and at that time Tanya would surely start investigating further. If she discovered that Aang was here, she'd turn this city into a death trap. Before that happened, he needed to figure another way to get everyone out of the city. Yet no matter how hard he thought, no answer came to mind. The atmosphere around the rebel headquarters was tense. Jung had started pushing everyone to take up arms again, and after their failed escape attempt a few more people were willing to listen to him. Opinions were divided, and with division came the seeds of conflict, small arguments for now, but each one with the promise of growing into something bigger if given the chance. General Jung. All eyes turned to the source of commotion as a woman came stumbling in, her flushed face and gasping breath a sign that she'd been running for quite a while to get here. Jung looked up from a document he'd been reading with a confused look. Lin? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be undercover at the governor's palace. I managed to slip away through the lockdown. I had to warn you. Lin gasped. What do you mean lockdown? What happened? Lin took a moment to catch her breath, then continued. That newly arrived admiral. The Moon Slayer. She knows the Avatar is here. She's putting the whole city on lockdown, taken over the governor's palace, and is sending every soldier she has out to track this place down. Already? How had she figured out that they were here so quickly? Jung growled. If she wants us, let her come and take us. We'll bury her and her forces in these caves. No. You can't. Cried Aang, rushing over to stand in front of him with a look of pure panic on his face. You didn't see the lengths she was willing to go to for victory at the North Pole. Now more than ever, we need to focus on escaping. She's having archers and trebuchets set up all along the walls, with orders to shoot at anything that flies without hesitation. Lin added. And has doubled the guards at the city gates. Orders are that absolutely nobody leaves without her express permission. Katara, caught somewhere between Aang's panic and Jung's fury herself, spoke up. What about underground? Is there no way to dig a tunnel underneath the ravine surrounding the city? The deeper you dig, the greater the pressure. One of the nearby rebels interjected. Even a master earthbender can only go so far underground, and there's yet to be one powerful enough to dig a tunnel deeper than the ravine. That's not true. Jung stated. All eyes turned to the general as he spoke. There is a secret tunnel beneath the palace, at the bottom of the crystal cavern where King Bumi had the Avatar face 3 trials. It is said to have been created by Oma, the founder of Omashu, and is said to connect to a secret tunnel. Through the mountains. The Cave of Two Lovers. Aang finished excitedly. Jung looked shocked. You know about it. I've been there. We figured out the trick to navigating through the tunnels. Jung looked surprised, but not disbelieving. After a moment to regain his composure, he cleared his throat. Be that as it may, to reach the entrance we'll have no choice but to attack the governor's palace. That means going toe-to-toe with Admiral Tanya and no small number of firebender soldiers. If we're committing to this course of action, I want to be sure that the tunnel hasn't already been discovered and sealed off. He turned back to Lin. Are you able to return to the palace again? Lin shook her head. No. They'll have noticed my absence by now, and if I'm spotted I'll be detained for sure. Then we'll need to find someone else. Jung declared. Someone capable of sneaking into a heavily fortified area unseen. Everyone was silent for a second, until one of the nearby rebels piped up. You know, I think I might know just the guy. It was still something of a shock to see Omashu decked out in Fire Nation colors. It had been a consistent threat for 100 years, a stubborn dot on the map that refused to give in to Fire Nation rule no matter how many troops were thrown at it. With it gone, Ba Sing Se was the only major city left in the Earth Kingdom that hadn't fallen. The war is coming to a close. A few more years and we'll have won. Zuko thought to himself. A proper prince would be joyous to know that victory for his nation was nearly at hand. Instead, all he could think was that time was running out. If the war finished and the Avatar had still not been captured, would father still let him come back home? By birthright, he should be lying in the finest room of the governor's palace right now. He should have the local soldiers at his beck and call. Instead, he was hiding from those same soldiers, squatting away in a peasant's home. He'd snuck into the city clinging to the bottom of a cart filled with cabbages, and had given the wooden medallion to the staff at the Gritty Crown. They'd given him the room for the night, promising a meeting with a rebellion member in the morning. Only the next morning there had been a delay. Something about a pandemic that had quickly spread across the city. Zuko had considered leaving, but wisdom had counseled him to stay. Leave, and he'd be wandering around aimlessly hoping to stumble across the Avatar by pure chance. Even if this rebellion couldn't give him more than a general idea of which direction the Avatar was heading in, it would be worth a day of waiting. A knock at the door caught his attention, and Zuko sat up from the stiff bed he'd been given and grabbed his blue spirit mask from the side table, fixing it securely over his face before standing up and going over to answer. The moment he opened it, he nearly jumped out of his skin at the tanned face waiting there. Whoa! Cool mask! The Water Tribe peasant, Sokka, greeted cheerfully. Where'd you get it? Zuko's brain stalled, unable to process what was going on. When the silence dragged on for too long, Sokka tilted his head to the side. Are you all right there? He's a mute. Can't say a word, but his skill with swords does the talking for him. Michi, the owner of the Gritty Crown and secret rebellion supporter, introduced. Made a name for himself facing off alone against every thief, bandit and ne'er-do-well around this part of the map. Folks called him the Blue Spirit. The Blue Spirit. Oh great! The other water peasant, Katara, was here too. Ong, isn't that the same guy who rescued you from Tanya and Zhao back at the fortress? Zuko looked past her and Sokka, past Michi, past the stern-looking man dressed like a soldier, only for his eyes to land on the form of a bald child in orange robes. The same child that he had devoted his life to capturing, and that had now once again appeared right in front of him at a time where he was alone, outnumbered and weakened from his long journey. The spirits really did love to torment him. One word from the Avatar, and he'd be swarmed by more rebellion soldiers than he could handle at once. Ong was looking right at him, clearly just as surprised as he was. Behind his mask, Zuko grit his teeth. One word from him and it was all over. If the rebellion didn't throw him in a cell themselves, they'd hand him over to the Fire Nation and let them do it for them. For a moment Ong said nothing, staring directly at him with those wide, annoyingly bright eyes of his. The others looked at him in confusion, wondering why he wasn't saying anything. Then, with the gentle smile of one greeting an old friend, Ong put his hands together and bowed gratefully at the waist. I never got a chance to properly thank you last time. He said respectfully. Thank you Blue Spirit, for saving my life that day. Zuko unconsciously took a step back, now completely thrown. Was he dreaming? Hallucinating? Why was the Avatar of all people not exposing him? Had he forgotten everything that Zuko had done while pursuing him? Ong straightened up from his bow. There wasn't a hint of hostility about him, not the slightest tension in his fists, or a flicker of anger in his eyes. He seemed genuinely happy for some reason. Before Zuko could figure out why, Ong walked forward to stand right in front of the doorway and held out a hand, as if offering a handshake. Could I ask for your help one more time? While proofreading this chapter, I noticed how many times I had accidentally misspelled Ty Lee's name as Ty Lee, and one occasion where I accidentally wrote Tai Lung. I'm not sure that even the avatar state would have been enough to allow Ong to escape the real dragon warrior. Yes, Team Aela is all back together. Aela is the brave and noble hero, Mai the stoic knight, Tai Li the quirky rogue, and Tanya the wise old wizard. Together they shall embark upon a dangerous and heroic journey to save the Fire Nation from the reincarnated demon avatar. I've put a fair bit of thought into how I want their relationships to grow and develop along their journey, and hopefully you can see the beginnings of the relationship I have planned for Tai Li and Tanya in this chapter. Next chapter we'll spend a bit more time with Mai. And holy moly, look at all these followers and favorites. It's amazing to know that this story has received so much positive attention, and we're not even halfway through yet. Thank you so much to everyone following this FIC. I hope you continue to enjoy it. Chapter 72. Once, when he was only 5 years old, Monk Yitsu had taken him to the peak of a mountain. Airbending had come easily to Ong, and he was definitely among the most skilled of his age group. Yet that did not mean everything came to him without difficulty. The day before, Gyutsu had deemed him ready to attempt his first glider flight. They had spent the whole day on the ground first, running through the techniques that would guide the air around him to flow in the direction he wanted, until the sun had been just about to set. Gyutsu had offered him a practice glider staff, taken him to a small ledge just above a pool of water, and instructed him to jump. Ong had done so without hesitation, as children often did, but panic had immediately jolted through him as he felt that something was wrong. There had been a tear in the practice staff, hidden from sight whilst folded, and its sails could not catch the wind properly. Both Ong and the staff crashed down unceremoniously into the water. Gyatso had swiftly rushed down to help him, but after confirming that Ong was unharmed he'd been unconcerned. He laughed it off, repaired the tear in the staff, then handed it back and prompted Ong to try again. But Ong couldn't. The moment he'd stepped up to the ledge, the drop beneath him had seemed to grow in height before his eyes. Fear had overcome him, and he stepped away with teary cheeks, fully expecting to see Gyatso's disappointed face when he turned around. Would his teacher be ashamed of his student's cowardice? Annoyed by his disobedience? Angry at his failure? Yet Gyatso had not been disappointed. He'd place a hand on his shoulder as he guided him back to the temple, and promised that tomorrow they would overcome this hurdle together. At the top of the mountain, the wind flowed fiercer and more freely than Ong had ever felt before. The cold seeped through his robes and into his bones, but Ong had not minded it. He felt a sense of rightness that his young mind had not had the words for. It was energetic, primal, wild, and yet by contrast still so peaceful and gentle, like a great tiger lounging peacefully in a tree. Gyatso had tied a rope firmly around Ong's stomach, checking the knot no less than 3 times over, then nodded sagely, and handed him the same glider staff from yesterday. Open it. Gyatso had said. Let it catch the wind, and carry you up. I am here, and I will not let the sky take you away. Ong looked uneasy. Can I use a different staff? He asked. Gyatso smiled, as if he had anticipated the question. What is wrong with the one you have? He asked patiently. It's broken. Ong replied. It should be thrown away. Gyatso did not look perturbed. Was broken. He stressed, opening the glider to show the stitch he had made yesterday. Yet that does not mean it has lost its worth. It is true that it let you down yesterday, but this staff has changed since then. With a little care and effort, what was broken has been repaired. He ran a hand across the stitch. The past has not been forgotten. The scars of its failure may never fade. But that does not mean that a failure is all it shall ever be. It may yet still be the wings that allow you to fly. How can you be sure? Ong asked, hanging on Gyatso's every word, yet still doubtful of the glider. Gyatso smiled at him. We can never be sure, Ong. Life is full of surprises. Yet if you do not give it a chance, how can it ever prove that it has become worthy of your trust? He held out the glider staff to Ong again, and hesitantly Ong took it. He stood, shot Gyatso a nervous glance, and then, gingerly, flicked the glider open. The wind caught it immediately, and Ong was lifted 10 feet into the air before Gyatso's rope snapped taut. Like a kite, Ong hung in the sky, feeling the rushing of the winds around him and the weightlessness of true flight. A wide, goofy grin spread across his face as his heart swelled with the sensation of freedom unlike he'd ever felt before, and he whooped in pure joy. Flying was amazing. Even just hovering a little above the ground like this, Ong felt so light and untroubled. He floated there for 10 or so minutes, giggling whenever Gyatso wobbled the rope to send him darting around like a dragonfly, until finally his teacher reeled him back in. There was a twinkle in the old monk's eye as he spoke to him. So Ong, do you still want another glider? Ong shook his head quickly and held his staff tightly, almost possessively to his chest. Gyatso laughed, and patted his head. Good. Now come, let's get some lunch. I'm starving. When can we get some lunch? Ong shook his head, the daydream dispelled by Sokka's words. There was no wind underground, no comforting breeze, and a part of Ong couldn't wait for this whole rebellion strategy meeting to be over so that he could go outside again. Yet his wisdom curbed that instinct. Bumi needed his help, and the only way to do that was to pay attention and work with the rebellion to iron out the details of their escape plan. A plan that revolved around trusting the same boy who'd hunted them halfway around the world. Across the table sat the Blue Spirit, his posture so stiff from social awkwardness that it was a miracle his spine didn't crack. Next to him, Katara smiled happily and said something to him Ong didn't catch. She'd liked him the moment that Ong had confirmed he was the one who freed him from the fortress, and seemed to have made it her personal mission to befriend the clearly socially awkward boy in the mask. Ong hadn't told her or Sokka that he knew who the Blue Spirit was. He hadn't lied to them really, just omitted the final part of his story of how he'd escaped, the part where he'd snuck a peek under the mask. He still wanted to believe that he and Zuko didn't have to be enemies, or could perhaps even be friends one day, but he knew that Sokka and Katara wouldn't understand. Keeping the Blue Spirit's real identity hidden at the time had felt like an unspoken declaration of trust in the angry young prince. Now it seemed the time had come to take a gamble on that trust. Ong was under no illusion that Zuko had suddenly transformed into a saint overnight, but back at the North Pole the prince had surprised everyone when he freed the captured ocean and moon spirits from Tanya's clutches. He had shown that, as damaged as growing up in the Fire Nation had made him, he was still capable of seeing what the right thing to do was. It was also obvious that he'd suffered for that decision. He was traveling alone now, dressed in tatty grey rags, and noticeably thinner than he'd been before. The plan the rebellion was cooking up relied heavily on the Blue Spirit's stealth abilities, and Zuko would be in the perfect position to sabotage their efforts. All it would take was him taking off his mask and leading the Fire Nation here, and the Omashu rebellion was done for. Many would call it foolish to put so much trust in Zuko after all he'd done before, and a part of Ong couldn't help but agree. He glanced over at his glider staff, knowing without having to open it where that little stitch monk Gyatso had made was. If he wanted Zuko to change, he had to give him the chance to. Follow the staircase down on the right, and you'll reach the crystal cave. Jung finished, pointing to the map of the palace interior he had drawn out. The entrance to the escape tunnel is right at the bottom, a doorway concealed behind a large green crystal. Once you can confirm that it is undiscovered by the Fire Nation, head back up again and make your escape. In the meantime the rest of us will be preparing for the assault. Meet us back here, and we'll launch the attack as soon as possible. Hold on. Ong interjected. Where are they holding Bumi? Jung scowled. I don't know. Why does it matter anyway? He welcomed the Fire Nation into our homes, the bed he's lying in is one of his own making. He is my friend. Ong replied plainly. And your king? I won't abandon him. Jung scoffed and looked away. Have it your way. But we don't know where in the palace he's being held. I can guess at a few areas, but we won't know for sure, and we won't have time to waste trying to find him during the assault. What if Blue looked around for him as well? Katara asked. And suppose that he got caught doing so? The more tasks we give the Blue Spirit to accomplish, the higher the chance he'll be caught. We know where the escape tunnel is, but searching the whole palace is another story. Katara looked at the newly nicknamed Blue, who nodded once to confirm that Jung was right. Okay, what if someone else went with him? They could search for Bumi, while Blue checks the escape tunnel. Katara asked. Jung frowned. We're soldiers, not thieves. I don't know anyone else who could get around the palace undetected. Perhaps they don't have to. All eyes turned to Sokka, who'd adopted that pensive look he got whenever he was on the verge of a genuinely good idea. Didn't you say earlier that all the patrol paths have been changing since Tanya took over? Sokka continued. He tapped a finger on his chin thoughtfully. Soldiers are being reassigned to new positions left and right. The new status quo is bound to be unfamiliar to them too. And with unfamiliarity, there'll be mistakes. Opportunities. Jung eyed him curiously. What are you suggesting? Do you have any Fire Nation uniforms? We've picked up a couple recently. Do you think a simple disguise will be enough? Right now, yes. Any suspicious behavior can be blamed on making mistakes because we've just been reassigned to a new job. Jung stroked his chin. That could work. Not with too many people though. Any more than a handful will attract too much attention. We only need one person to confirm Bumi's location. I'll go. Ong immediately volunteered. No offense, Avatar, but you are too small to be a soldier, and your tattoos are too recognizable. Sokka stood up. Then I'll go. Sokka. No. Katara protested. It's too dangerous. Jung eyed him carefully. Your resolve is admirable, but are you certain? If you are caught, I cannot guess what fate would await you. Sokka nodded. I am a warrior of the Southern Water Tribes. I won't fail. Chapter 73. Sokka. No. Katara protested. It's too dangerous. Jung eyed him carefully. Your resolve is admirable, but are you certain? If you are caught, I cannot guess what fate would await you. Sokka nodded. I am a warrior of the Southern Water Tribes. I won't fail. Very well. Jung rose from his seat. In that case, I have preparations to attend to immediately if we are to begin the assault as soon as possible. Sokka, Blue Spirit, I wish you both good fortune in your missions. May the spirits watch over you. As he strode away, Ong and Katara rounded on Sokka. Sokka, what are you doing? Katara hissed. What we have to do to protect the people we care about. Sokka replied resolutely. Many in the rebellion resent Bumi for surrendering to the Fire Nation. If we leave one of their agents to do this, they may not look for Bumi and claim that they couldn't find him. Ong needs an earthbending teacher, and Bumi's is the only one we know we can trust. Plus, Bumi is Ong's, our friend. We have to do all we can to free him, even if it's a little risky. Ong and Katara shared an uneasy look, but couldn't refute his words. Seeing that they were coming around, Sokka gave them each a reassuring pat on the back. Have some faith in me. I can do this. Katara gripped his hand. We'll be waiting a safe distance away. If there's any trouble, any at all, find a way to signal us. We won't let you be captured too. Sokka smiled mischievously. Don't worry. With what I have planned, they'll never suspect a thing. Watching Tanya work was like watching a master conductor before an orchestra. Each movement of her hand was a gesture to direct her officers to a new location. Each word, a clear and concise command so authoritative that none even considered disobedience. Mai had studied the arts of war at the Royal Academy for Girls, and though she'd never been bad at it, it had never been one of her strongest subjects either. Ty Lee had been terrible, and Aela had gotten top marks. Tanya though sometimes seemed as if she could have aced her exams before she'd even attended the first lesson, like she'd been born with a library of military strategies in her head. The academy had taught them to prepare for and lead battles, but had assumed that, being as its students were all from the highest echelon of Fire Nation society, there would be subordinates to take care of the lesser duties for them, organizing supplies, planning guard duties, managing promotions, and all the other little tasks that allowed a military force to move effectively. It had been more important to hurry them along to their next etiquette lesson than study those sorts of things. Tanya had studied them. More than that, she had mastered them. Mai didn't know when exactly she'd found the time, but the results spoke for themselves. She had done in 3 hours what should have taken days to accomplish, confined the local population to their homes, hidden key supplies in new areas, and organized an entirely new command structure for their military forces that was better adapted for finding and combating the rebel forces. The sun had not even set since she'd arrived, and already Omashu was like an entirely new city. Send a scouting party to all wells and public sources of water. The rebels must be drawing fresh water into their headquarters from somewhere. If we can find it, we can poison them. Tanya's voice was sounding notably hoarse after 3 hours of barking out non-stop orders at her newly appointed commanders. Mai knew from plenty of personal experiences that although Tanya would often lecture others on the importance of frequent rest to maximize working efficiency, she herself would work with an obsessive, single-minded focus whenever a task fully captivated her attention. She had the borderline dangerous level of discipline one would expect from veteran soldiers, the mindset to ignore all fatigue, distractions, and discomfort until the mission was done, and sometimes seemed to slip into that mode on the most mundane tasks without even seeming to realize it herself. Ty Lee was normally the one who'd coerce her into taking a break when she got like this, but her acrobatic friend had left a little while ago with Aela to investigate the reports of the pentapox victims mysteriously disappearing. That meant it was left to her to drag her workaholic friend back to reality. Oh joy! Mai walked over to the tea table, where a pot of that obscure drink called coffee that Tanya was so fond of had been left earlier, and poured some into a fine china cup her mother used for entertaining important guests. Then she approached the table with the large map upon it that Tanya had commandeered for her planning, placed the coffee down, and butted into the conversation Tanya was having with a nervous officer with a meaningful clearing of her throat. As both their eyes turned to her, Mai fixed Tanya with a deadpan expression. Enough. You need to take a break. What was the point in tiptoeing around the subject? Straightforward bluntness worked just well. Tanya scoffed dismissively. I'll take a break in a minute. Just let me sort out this strategy first. I reckon if we fill mail carts with explosive powder, we can use the delivery system chutes to quickly and accurately deliver a bomb to any part of the city where the rebellion appears in force, and blast apart their formations right before. Yes, I'm sure you've come up with 100 new ways to turn my dad's city into a death trap. Well done, we're all very impressed. Mai interrupted sarcastically. Now sit down and drink your coffee. But Sit Tanya. Tanya pouted, but even she couldn't last long under one of Mai's deadpan glares, especially when a part of her knew she was right. With a heavy sigh Tanya sat down, dismissed the officer with a wave of her hand, and took a deep gulp of coffee. You've got a knack for brewing this stuff. She noted absently. I like it. Mai replied. It's bitter and dark. Just like me. Tanya smirked at that, and for a few minutes the two sat in comfortable silence as they often had, enjoying each other's company without much need for words. Is it true what Aela said? Mai suddenly asked, prompting Tanya to look at her questioningly. Is it true that Zuko betrayed us during the siege of the north? That you tried to kill him? Tanya froze, her coffee halfway to her lips, and her expression tightened with anger as a memory flashed before her eyes. I know this must be difficult to hear, Mai, but it's true. She growled out. I had ultimate victory over not just the Avatar, but every waterbender on the planet, quite literally. But he threw it all away at the last moment out of some misguided sense of righteousness. She put down her coffee cup. I'll admit, in the heat of the moment I wanted to hurt him. Badly. Part of me still wants to do so now. But I won't kill him if it makes Aela suffer. She huffed. In some ways I'd prefer to bring him back to his father alive anyway. See him face true, legal justice for his crimes. I see. Mai said flatly. Her face was as blank as a stone, but something in her eyes narrowed dangerously just a little. Tanya was perceptive enough to notice, and sighed regretfully. I'm sorry, Mai. I know this must be especially difficult for you, considering. Tanya trailed off. Mai stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. She snapped woodenly. Come on, Mai, we all saw the way you acted around Zuko when we were children. How you never spoke a word when he was with us, how you kept sneaking glances towards him, how you looked so nervous whenever he came close to you. Mai clenched her fist, looking about a second away from throwing her knives around. It's obvious that you were afraid of him. Mai froze, but this time for a very different reason. Tension bled out of her expression, replaced by confusion. Wah. Tanya nodded self-assuredly, utterly convinced that she was right. I think it's very brave of you, joining us on a hunt for the very person who so intimidated you as a child. It takes courage to face your fears. Mai stared blankly at her, completely lost. Tanya, I was never afraid of him. She muttered. Please, Mai, you can trust me with this. I won't think less of you for admitting your fears, especially when you are willing to face them head-on. Tanya replied seriously. Zuko was a very boisterous boy, and so easily angered, and you were such a quiet and shy girl back then. I'm sure you weren't the only one who found him scary to be around. Mai shook her head. No, Tanya, listen. I really wasn't. Suddenly the doors of the office burst open, slamming against the walls, and Aela strode in triumphantly, with Ty Lee on her heels. We found a patch of shifted dirt nearby. Aela declared pridefully. The plague victims disappeared down a tunnel, no doubt to the rebellion headquarters. I've had the local soldiers start digging the tunnel open again. Yes. Tanya was on her feet, back in military mode in the blink of an eye. Ty Lee, inform Officer Kai to get the extermination team prepped and ready. Aye, Admiral. Ty Lee flipped her a casual imitation of a salute and ran off. Aela's eyes sharpened dangerously at seeing her taking orders from someone else. Clearly it hasn't dawned on you yet then. She drawled, looking back at Tanya. Come on Tanya, think. Why would the rebellion want to bring the entire infected population into their own headquarters? Tanya opened her mouth, and floundered as she realized that she didn't have an answer. With a put-upon roll of her eyes, Aela continued. The infected were the rebels all along. Not one of the guards around the quarantine zone caught this supposedly highly infectious virus. It was a fake plague, designed to try and get the rebels out of the city. Tanya's face scrunched up in thought as she caught on. You think their aim is to escape? But then why did the Avatar target Mai in that ambush? That suggests their aim is to fight back. She fell back into her chair, her expression pensive as her mind worked to try and connect the facts she had into a wider picture. After a good minute of heavy thinking she let out a heavy groan, massaging her temples with her fingers. It's no good. King Bumi is clearly a master strategist of the likes I've never encountered before. I can't see the design in his moves. There just isn't enough information to discern his end goal. Aela sneered victoriously. Oh? Has the amazing Admiral Tanya finally met her match? Why not interrogate him? Mai asked bluntly. He's being held in an iron coffin in the upper dungeons. Perhaps, if you talk to him, you might gain some insight about his plans. Tanya hummed thoughtfully, tapping a finger on her chin. Good idea Mai. One would never aim to become a king if they didn't possess a great degree of pride. Perhaps, if I can trick him into boasting, he'll let slip some useful intel. She frowned. Ah, but I can't leave the command room now that a route to their headquarters has been discovered. We need to be able to react to any changes at a second's notice. Then I will take command. Aela interjected haughtily. It's what I'm best at after all. Tanya beamed at her. Thank you Aela. I'll leave everything in your capable hands. Chapter 74. How exactly had it ended up like this? A few months ago he'd been righteously pursuing the Avatar around the globe, slowly but surely tracking his quarry and wearing him down. Yet now here he was, hidden behind a mask and leaping from rooftop to rooftop as he escorted one of the Avatar's friends on a mission against his own nation. Where had it all gone wrong? Zuko didn't understand why the Avatar hadn't told his friends about his secret identity after the Yuan Archers incident, or why he hadn't exposed him on the spot back at the restaurant. Was this some convoluted attempt at trying to befriend him? Did he think Zuko had forsaken his loyalty to his nation because of what happened at the North Pole? If so he was wrong. Zuko loved his nation and believed in their cause, he'd just objected to Tanya's methods. The only reason he hadn't grabbed the Avatar and dragged him to the nearest guard patrol at the first opportunity was because Tanya had taken control of the city. He had no guarantee that if Tanya got her hands on the Avatar she wouldn't have them both executed on the spot. That meant, as strange as it sounded, that in order to make sure he was the one who captured the Avatar in the end, he'd have to help him escape from Omashu. His feet made no sound as they brushed across the roof tiles, stalking through the shadows cast by the setting sun without a trace. The same could not be said for his bumbling tag-along, whose armor rattled and clinked heavily with each leap. After one particularly loud clunk, Zuko could no longer fight the urge to whirl around and press a single finger to the lips of his mask in the universal gesture for silence. Sorry. Whispered Sokka between gaps and pants. Jumping around in armor isn't easy you know. That was true, but fortunately it wouldn't be a problem any longer. They were a single building away from the governor's palace now, which meant it was time for Sokka to stop scrambling around rooftops and trust in his disguise to take him further. Zuko led the way to the edge of the roof and helped Sokka lower himself down to the pavement, then with feline grace pounced down in one easy movement. Show off. Sokka muttered, before slinging a satchel off his shoulder and unpacking its contents. He cracked open a jar of some kind of clear paste, and Zuko tilted his head to the side in a gesture of curiosity as he began smearing it across his chin. It's all part of the disguise. Sokka explained, wiping his hands clean and then picking out clumps of what looked to be long, brown hairs. Tanya saw my face during the Siege of the North, and while I was never the subject of her attention there's a chance she may recognize me. Luckily a little bit of glue and some hair can fix that. Say goodbye to Sokka. He straightened out the hair now stuck to his chin with a comb, straightening it into a long end, admittedly realistic looking, beard. And hello to Wang Fire. Zuko's hand collided with wood as he instinctively tried to facepalm himself. But Sokka was undeterred. With a swagger that was far too exaggerated to be natural he strode off towards the governor's palace, ignoring or not seeing Zuko's frantic gestures to come back. The moment the sentries at the door saw him it was too late to stop. Good day, fellow guardsmen. Sokka greeted boisterously, his voice deliberately deeper than normal. My, what a fine day it's been for conquest and subjugation, right? Zuko was glad that his mask was made of wood. It protected his head when he started banging it against the wall. The guard on the left chuckled good-naturedly. Yeah, I hear you, buddy. All finished patrolling for the day. Indeed. Sokka replied. Though unfortunately I've made a bit of a mistake. I used to be stationed in the palace, and seem to have forgotten my pass. The left guard sighed heavily. Ugh, you and half the garrison. Job was nice and easy until little Miss Golden Child showed up and started restructuring everything. Don't worry, we'll let you sneak in this once. The left guard moved to let Sokka pass, until the guard on the right suddenly lowered his spear down to block his path. Hold on a minute. He growled. Sokka tensed, and Zuko's hands drifted to the hilt of his swords. I can't help but notice that your skin's mighty dark for a citizen of the Fire Nation. The right guard continued, his voice laced with suspicion. Downright water tribe, I would say. Silently Zuko began to pull his blades from their sheath, his body crouching in preparation to sprint forwards. Until the left guard let out an exasperated sigh. By Agni, not this again. Kong, how many more times, you've got to stop judging people on the color of their skin. This is the colonies, there are plenty of soldiers with mixed heritage. The right guard huffed irritably. It ain't right. Fire Nation blood ought to stay pure. The left guard shook his head and turned back to Sokka. Sorry about him. Came here straight from the homeland. He said apologetically, as if that explained everything. Come on in. Unbelievable. That actually worked. Zuko wasn't sure whether he should be cheerful or dismayed at how such a ridiculous disguise could fool his nation's men. A second later he caught himself, there was no time to waste. The sooner he could confirm that the escape tunnel was still undiscovered, the better. Silently he stalked back into the shadows, searching for another entry point. It wasn't too long ago that Sokka had walked down these very halls with Ong, back when King Bumi was still in charge. The palace had that grand and powerful atmosphere, as any palace should, but hadn't struck Sokka as pointlessly extravagant. The paintings and other artworks on display had been reflections of Omashu's history and culture, meant to educate and remind visitors what principles Omashu had built itself up from a pair of small tribes into the second largest city in the kingdom upon. That wasn't the case any longer. Green and stone grey had been replaced by red and gold. Portraits of past kings and queens had been swapped for unrealistically beautiful renditions of Fire Nation people Sokka didn't recognize. Sculptures made by local craftsmen were switched for gaudy trinkets caked with unnecessary gemstones. Tapestries of the city's history had been covered up with the red and black banner of the Fire Nation. Now it was just another place for a rich man to display his wealth, and Sokka mourned Omashu's loss. But there was no time to wallow in his thoughts. He needed to find King Bumi, the sooner the better. Thankfully his uniform was enough to merit him no more than a passing glance from the soldiers and palace servants as he walked by. Now if I wanted to confine an important prisoner, where would I do it? He muttered to himself. Some deep, dark underground dungeon would be his first guess, but that was a terrible idea if said prisoner was a powerful earthbender. Somewhere with lots of metal probably. And as far away from the earth as possible. His eyes trailed upwards, recalling that he'd seen some scaffolding on the palace roof during the journey over. He'd probably have more luck starting his search on the top floor and making his way down. One long and tiring walk all the way up flights of stairs later, Sokka had reached the top floor. The spiral staircase and the round layout of the top floor made him guess that it had once been an observatory, or some similar purpose that involved looking at the sky. Now however every square inch of the floor had been covered in plain iron, and there was a suspiciously high concentration of guards hanging around. Jackpot! He took a few steps forward, and was immediately intercepted by another guard. State your business. The woman said, her lackluster tone suggesting that she wasn't expecting any real trouble, just going through the motions her duty required of her. I'm here. Sokka raced to think of an acceptable excuse. Here to empty the prisoner's chamber pot. Ah, you're the new poor sod stuck on waste duty. She stepped aside and nodded towards a hallway with a large iron door at the other end, and two soldiers chatting idly in front of it. Go ahead. Sokka nodded a silent thanks and headed towards the door, hoping that these next soldiers would be as easily deceived as the previous two. His hopes sank when, as he drew closer, the soldiers looked over to him and their eyes widened in alarm. They suddenly stood ramrod straight, becoming picture-perfect images of the attentive guards, and the air around them became charged with a tense anticipation that felt far too much for their task. What was going on? "Hello," he said as he came to a stop in front of them, hoping a disarming smile would get them to loosen up. "I'm here to empty the prisoner's chamber pot." The soldiers didn't react to him, didn't so much as twitch. Now that he was closer he could see that the soldiers weren't there actually looking at him, but something behind him. Hello. At ease." A trickle of ice-cold dread ran down Sokka's spine as a voice he recognized all too well sounded behind him. Now that he was not moving himself, he could hear the sound of a pair of smaller, lighter footsteps following down the hallway behind him. Slowly he turned around, hoping desperately that he'd misheard. Sunlight golden hair greeted his gaze. Admiral Tanya, the infamous Moon Slayer, walked purposefully towards him. Sokka wished he could have said that his first reaction was righteous fury for all she'd done in the north, for what she'd done to you, but that would have been a lie. His first gut instinct was a deep, primal dread that made him want to run for his life. Despite her deceptively small and innocent appearance, he knew that this girl was a stone-cold killer, a psychopath in a uniform. And if his disguise didn't hold, torture or outright execution awaited. In a panic he threw up a quick, shoddy salute, and dropped it again just as quickly when he noticed that the guards had returned to standing at ease in her order. His antics seemed to draw a half-amused, half-exasperated smile from Tanya. Chapter 75. In a panic he threw up a quick, shoddy salute, and dropped it again just as quickly when he noticed that the guards had returned to standing at ease in her order. His antics seemed to draw a half-amused, half-exasperated smile from Tanya. "No need to fear, Private. Despite what my reputation suggests, I won't actually court-martial you for making an honest mistake." She came to a stop beside him and looked at the guards. "I'm here to speak with the prisoner. Open the door." The guards got to work so fast you'd think their life depended on it, turning keys and pulling back bolts that kept the thick metal doors firmly sealed. As they waited for the door to open, Tanya glanced over at Sokka again. "What's your name, soldier? What brings you to visit King Bumi?" "Oh no. She was trying to start a conversation with him. This was bad, very very bad. He wanted the least amount of her attention on him as possible. The closer she looked, the more she might recognize him from the North Pole. Only his mighty, luxurious beard stood between him and certain death. "Wang fire, ma'am. Chamber pot duty," he replied nervously, realizing that not replying at all would be more suspicious. Desperately he tried to recall if Tanya had ever had the opportunity to hear his voice before. Tanya hummed approvingly. "That's a good, patriotic name." With an ominous creak the door swung open, and she stepped forward. "My conversation need not be private, and I'd hate to keep you from your other duties. Come on in." He really didn't want to, but after being invited there wasn't really much choice. Hesitantly, Sokka followed Tanya into the gloomy room. It was dome-shaped, plated with thick, dull iron from head to toe, and bare of all decorations save for a single barred window at the back to let fresh air in. In the center of the room stood a large metal coffin, just as dark and ugly as the rest of the room. Sticking out of its front was the face of King Bumi, looking calmly excited to see them and entirely unbothered by the fact that the rest of his body was imprisoned. "The infamous King Bumi. We meet at last. You've given me quite the challenge," Tanya announced, striding forward and coming to a stop in front of him. Bumi gave her a curious look. "I'm sorry, have we met face to face?" "No. But I like to think I've gotten to know you quite well already from figuring out your plans for your rebellion cell." "What rebellion?" Tanya smirked. "Don't be coy. The rebellion you secretly set the groundwork for when you faked your surrender." Bumi raised an eyebrow. "I didn't do anything." "Yes, I'm sure that's what you'd like me to think." Tanya began to pace back and forwards, her expression growing gravely serious. "Just as I'm sure that you knew nothing about the Avatar joining up with them." A beaming, toothy smile spread across Bumi's face. "Ong is here? Why, how thoughtful of him. Is he doing well?" "Please, enough with playing the fool," Tanya snapped. "Who else but a mind like yours could have concocted a plan as devilishly brilliant as the fake Pentapox outbreak? You may be a genius, King Bumi, but I assure you that I am one step ahead of even you." Bumi was silent as he stared at her for a few tense seconds. Then he whistled loudly. "You are one paranoid young lady." Sokka could physically see Tanya's patience snapping like an old rope. Don't act like you have the upper hand here. I see through your games. Games? I have literally done absolutely nothing. Fine. Play dumb if you want. We'll see who has the last laugh when you're sharing a cell with your friend the Avatar. I would quite enjoy that actually. Ong has always been such lovely company. Aha! Tanya rounded back on him victoriously. So you know the Avatar that well? Yet my spies report that he was only in Omashu for a day. How have you been able to keep in regular contact with someone who constantly travels by flying bison? I haven't. Bumi replied casually. I knew Ong for a long time before then. He lived in Omashu before. Tanya narrowed her eyes curiously, until they suddenly alighted with realization. Wait, is this where the Avatar was born? I always figured some surviving air nomads must have fled somewhere. Oh no, you misunderstand. Bumi replied simply. Ong never formally lived here, but he used to visit all the time. We were childhood friends. Childhood friends? Tanya replied disbelievingly. Despite the fact that you must be closing in on 100 years old, and he can't be any more than 13. Bumi chuckled. Oh you flatterer. I'm 112 actually. I credit my youthful complexion to a healthy diet of cabbages. Tanya snarled with rage, and Sokka shuffled over to the thankfully empty chamber pot and tried to make himself look busy. He did not want the attention of an angry firebender on him right now. It wasn't long however before Tanya forced her composure back into place, and fixed King Bumi with a deadly serious glare. Fine. You want to treat this like a joke? We'll see who's laughing in a few hours. She turned on her heel and stormed off, practically throwing the metal door open and stomping out in the same way Katara did when she was furious. Sokka, quickly remembering that he had a cover to maintain, moved to go after her. I am not the one who was meant to teach him. Sokka stopped, turning back to King Bumi, whose eyes were upon him now. The old king was still smiling, but now it was regretful rather than sincere. I cannot leave Omashu, he whispered. Not while it faces such a crisis. When the proper time to strike back comes, I must be here. Tell him that, Sokka. Help him to understand. The one he is waiting for is one who waits and listens. I will. Sokka breathed, not quite sure what Bumi meant, but taken aback by the mournful tone of his voice. Bumi nodded to the door. Go now. That girl is as high-strung as the Fire Lord's personal guitar. Don't give her any reason to suspect you. Hurry. Sokka raced to obey, hurriedly marching out the door and shutting it behind him. He'd returned to the other end of the corridor just in time to catch the tail end of the orders. Tanya was barking at the soldiers waiting there. Mocking me. Clearly he had some sort of secret code in his words, a hidden clue to gloat over later if his plan succeeds. No doubt his reference to cabbages was one such taunt. Spread my orders, all cabbage-related wares in the Earth Kingdom are to be systematically destroyed by the end of the month. We can't risk the chance that they're a cover for a wide, secret network of King Bumi's informants. Yes, Admiral. One of the soldiers replied quickly, snapping a clumsy salute before hurriedly scurrying off to follow her orders. The moment she was out of sight, Tanya let out a heavy, stressful sigh. And here I thought that picking up my from Omashu would be an opportunity to relax. When did my life get so damn complicated? Perhaps it was a trick of the light, but for just a moment the demonette who savaged the north was gone, and in her place stood a girl even younger than Katara who'd been forced to bear the weight of responsibilities so much bigger than them. The tension in her shoulders and the bags under her eyes looked just like how Ong would always look for a few days after something reminded him of the impossible burden of being the Avatar. Quickly Sokka smothered those thoughts before they could take root. She was the enemy, a ruthless killing machine and nothing more. They couldn't afford to empathize with her. Tanya seemed to sense his presence as he came closer and drew her posture back up into the pose of the perfect military commander, all unwavering confidence and authority. It made it easy for Sokka to forget what he'd seen before. Ah, Private Fire. I feel I must apologize, I'm not usually one to lose my temper so easily. Alas, meddlesome old men have a way of getting under my skin. Oh, no problem Admiral, ma'am. Sokka floundered, completely unsure of what he was supposed to say. It seemed as if Tanya was used to her soldiers turning into nervous wrecks around her however, for she didn't give him a second glance. She took a step away, seeming for a moment like she was going to leave, but suddenly hesitated. Would you walk with me, Private? It's been a while since I've had a chance to talk with the boots on the ground, and it would be enlightening to know your thoughts. Sokka wanted to say no. He really wanted to say no. But Tanya was not the sort of person one said no to, especially when you were pretending to be someone working for her. Sure. He answered weakly, not at all convinced that he was doing a good enough job to fool her. Wonderful. Tanya shot him a quick smile, and began walking back down the stairs. Sokka fell into step behind her, hoping that the nervous pounding of his heartbeat he could feel in his ears wasn't audible to the Admiral as well. Tell me, Mr. Fire, do you believe that balance is important? What? The question took Sokka aback. Balance? Yes, of course it's important. It was what Ong was working so hard to bring back to the world. Tanya nodded. I agree. Radical opinions and actions are either inefficient or dangerous. Being extremely passive makes one weak and vulnerable, whilst being extremely aggressive turns everyone else against you. Be too controlling and your subordinates will rebel against you, but allow them too much freedom and they'll become lazy and uncoordinated. There are many examples in life that support the theory that the moderate, balanced approach is the ideal solution to any problem. It is no surprise really that all nations seek to attain balance in their own way. This coming from an admiral of the nation that had attacked the rest of the world without provocation 100 years ago. Sokka couldn't catch the derisive snort that slipped out of his mouth in time, and paled as Tanya looked at him with the first hints of suspicion in her eyes. You disagree? She asked curiously, as if she found the fact surprising. Chapter 76. This coming from an admiral of the nation that had attacked the rest of the world without provocation 100 years ago. Sokka couldn't catch the derisive snort that slipped out of his mouth in time, and paled as Tanya looked at him with the first hints of suspicion in her eyes. You disagree? She asked curiously, as if she found the fact surprising. Oh. No taking back his mistake now. The only option left was to lean into it. It's just that, out here in the colonies, it never really seems like balance in the our nation's dream when we're constantly marching forward to conquer new bits of land. I see your point. To his relief, Tanya's suspicious look turned pensive instead. I had never considered that soldiers from the colonies would be unfamiliar with the philosophy behind this war, though in hindsight I suppose there would be nowhere to pick it up from. It's a topic usually covered in schools back in the homeland. They teach war philosophy in schools. That made an unfortunate amount of sense. What better way to indoctrinate the next generation of nasty little fire slingers for military service? Tanya nodded. More so in schools for the upper class, but yes. It uses the example of a set of weighing scales with 4 arms rather than the standard 2 as an allegory for the balance of the elemental nations before the war. In the past the world was balanced, and therefore at peace, as long as all 4 nations were equally prosperous and powerful. Teachers would show this by placing equal weights within each of the scale's 4 arms, causing it to be balanced. Sokka could understand that. As long as all nations were equally powerful, none of them could afford to be overly aggressive with each other. If they did, the other 3 nations would unite to put them back in their place. It forced all 4 nations to play nice with each other. However, that system is deeply flawed. Tanya continued. Each of the nations have their own distinct cultures, resources, and technology. This causes their respective power, the weight on their arm of the scale, to wax and wane wildly out of conjunction with each other. Teachers would emphasize this point by randomly adding and removing weights of different sizes to each of the arms, causing the scales to rock and sway. The world cannot stay perfectly balanced because each of the nations cannot cooperate with each other. There are endless examples throughout history of this occurring: the Platinum Affair, the War of Secrets and Daggers, the Fifth Nation War, the Yellowneck Rebellion, the War of Chin the Conqueror. Each of these events threw off the balance of the world, causing misery and pain. Sokka did not know what any of those events were beside Chin the Conqueror. The Southern Water Tribe wasn't exactly regarded as a bastion of historical knowledge. Still, he got the gist of the point she was making. Okay, but how is becoming another balance-breaking event going to change anything? The answer to that is the reason why the Fire Nation is the one in a position to conquer the entire world: unity. Tanya answered. The Water Tribes are divided into North and South. The Earth Kingdom is split into many smaller kingdoms. Even the Air Nomads had the North, South, East and West temples. Only the Fire Nation has remained united together throughout history since the crowning of the first Fire Lord. This has been our advantage. Our unity has allowed our technology and resources to spread throughout our lands, thus allowing us to advance faster than the other nations, until we became so strong that an outright war with the rest of the world became feasible. Imagine if that unity encompassed the whole world? With no more imbalance in resources and technology, with the whole world sharing openly with each other under one government, then each side of the scale grows in tandem with each other. The world is not only balanced, but stays balanced. It was weird to hear that the Fire Nation, or at least some of its people, genuinely believed that they were good guys. In a way it made Sokka uncomfortable to see the demonic Moon Slayer, a figure of ultimate evil in so many of his recent nightmares, explain the reasoning behind her motives in such an understandable way. He did not agree with her philosophy, but it was easy to see why she and so many who grew up in her nation believed in it. With the right wording, there was a logic to it he'd never considered before. However, he could also see a flaw in it. But what about the forms of balance beside from the four nations? He argued. It was easy to look at the current state of world and assume that balance only applied to them, but his travels with Ong had opened his eyes to the fact that there was more to it than that. Hebei had taught them to respect the balance between the material world and the spirit world. The Great Divide had shown him the need for balance between clans and families. Jet had unintentionally taught him the follies of not balancing the passion to fight with the wisdom to have mercy. While world conquest may balance the disparity between the nations, it will throw other forms of balance into chaos. Just because the Fire Nation controls everything doesn't guarantee that they'll treat everywhere same as the homeland. There's already discrimination against Earthbenders in Earth Kingdom colonies. To his surprise, Tanya came to a stop, and he had to catch himself before he walked right into her. I have wondered that myself. For a while now. She admitted. Not long ago I had the opportunity to converse with the Avatar. She had? Back at Pahuay stronghold, no doubt. Why hadn't Ong told them? He raised the point that, in a world united beneath the Fire Nation, there would be no counterbalance to the authority of the Fire Lord. She seemed to squirm in place uncomfortably. Do not mistake me, I know both Fire Lord Oze and Princess Aela personally, and have no doubt that they will be fair and wise rulers. Yet it is a simple fact of business that, in the absence of proper competition, any organization inevitably becomes lazy. Without pressure to improve or be defeated, they become stagnant and inefficient. I have considered that, without other nations to contend with, future Fire Lords may become less concerned with the welfare of their people, and more concerned with their own comfort and pleasure. If they have no fear of their citizens deserting them for other nations, there is less imperative to address their concerns. There is a possibility that the balance between the nations will be offset by a disbalance between the rich and the poor. A possibility that, despite my best efforts, I cannot think of a solution to. A flash of annoyance shot through Sokka. If you know that the nation's philosophy is flawed, why continue to support it? It may not be perfect, but it's better than a future plagued by endless repetitions of conflict and conspiracy between nations. And I will not allow fear that the future may be filled with rebellions to make me hesitate. With enough work and effort there will be a way to restore the balance in other areas of life too. I am aware that the influence I possess means that my actions will have a notable effect on shaping the future, and even when the war is won I will use that influence to help solve these problems. Tanya replied, the iron tone of her voice reflecting nothing but sincere determination. How many other people in a position of power took the time to consider the ramifications their actions would have 100 years in the future? How many realized the responsibility that needed to come with wielding influence? And of those that did, how many had yet to even reach adulthood? Tanya was exceptionally mature for her age. She really was unervingly similar to Ong, a child far too young to bear the responsibilities they did, fighting for the cause they believed would bring balance to the world. Yet she had imprisoned you. She had crushed the northern tribe. Sokka could not forgive her for that, nor deny that he still hated her for it. Whatever her motives, her methods were too brutal, too extreme, for him to accept as necessary. Admiral Tanya. Sokka's thoughts were cut off as another soldier hurriedly approached, snapping a crisp salute at Tanya as he came to a stop. I bring news from the quarantine zone. The diggers have broken through to the rebels' tunnel system. They're widening it now, and estimate that it'll be large enough to bring the extermination squad through within the hour. What? They'd discovered and reopened the secret tunnel opened after the failure of his fake plague plan. He had to get back to the rebel HQ and warn them, otherwise they'd all be caught by a surprise attack. Excellent. Tanya was back in full military mode now, her every movement the picture-perfect image of an authoritative leader. Send word for the extermination squad to mobile and meet me at the tunnel. I will lead the attack that eradicates this rebellion myself. Yes, ma'am. The soldier replied, rushing away again to fulfill her orders. Tanya turned back to Sokka. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, Private Fire. I don't often get the chance to talk philosophy with someone who's willing to question our nation's doctrine. It feels good to voice some of my concerns for once. She nodded at him in an oddly respectful gesture. Farewell for now, Private. Keep that good head on your shoulders and I'm sure you'll be promoted above latrine duty before long. With that she turned and quickly marched away in the direction of the quarantine zone. Sokka waited until she was out of sight, then turned and began walking as quickly as he could without drawing attention to himself to the meeting point he'd arranged to reconvene with the Blue Spirit. There would be time to consider what to think about his unexpected insight into the Admiral's mind later, for now he had to get news back to the rebels in time. Chapter 77. Remaining unseen indoors was trickier than it sounded, but Zuko had a wealth of experience when it came to sneaking around palaces. It hadn't taken too long to make his way down into the crystal cave, and once there he began searching for the large green crystal Jung had described. Finally he'd found it, and more importantly had been able to feel a slight breeze coming from a crack between it and the wall of stone that it covered. The governor's men hadn't discovered the secret escape tunnel after all. That meant the rebellion, and with them the Avatar, still had a chance to escape this city. With that information confirmed, Zuko headed back to his meeting point with Sokka, one of the rooms used by the palace servants for storage. When he arrived Sokka was already there, scribbling furiously on a piece of parchment with such fervor that he didn't even notice Zuko enter. It wasn't until he put a hand on his shoulder that Sokka jumped and finally noticed him. "Blue! You're back!" he cried, his voice torn between surprise and desperation. Hastily he folded up the note he'd been writing and stuffed it into his hands. "There's no time. Tanya's discovered a way to the rebel headquarters, and in gathering a force to wipe them out as we speak. She'll be there within the hour. You need to get this note back to HQ as fast as you can. If they leave and begin the attack now, there's a chance they can all get out before Tanya and her extermination squad arrive. That also means that the most elite firebenders in Omashu won't be guarding the palace. It's the best shot we'll ever have of getting to the escape tunnel. It is still undiscovered, right?" Zuko nodded, and Sokka sighed in relief. "Good. This may be our only chance, otherwise Omashu will end up just like Agnikal and it'll all be my fault." He picked up a fire soldier helmet and placed it upon his head, the bristles of the ridiculous fake beard glued to his face sticking out the bottom. "I'll stay here. When the rebels arrive I can open the palace door from the inside. We need to do everything we can to move as quickly as possible, otherwise the extermination squad will return and attack from behind." There was no time to waste on pointless conversation. The clock was ticking, and every second wasted brought Tanya closer to the final victory she desperately desired. Without another word Zuko turned and ran, his mind already planning the optimal balance between stealth and speed he'd need to return to the rebels as soon as possible. In 1 hour war would arrive at Omashu. And if they played their cards right, perhaps this time Tanya wouldn't get her way after all. Night had fallen on Omashu. The city was deathly silent. With the civilians confined to their homes, the only ones out and about were the patrolling guards, who listened warily for the sounds of trouble. Even the governor's palace was quieter than usual now that many of its strongest troops had gone with Tanya to the quarantine zone. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a single pinprick of orange light appearing from around the corner of an alley. Nothing unusual in itself, patrols often conjured small flames in their hands to help themselves see in the dark. Nor was it unusual to see the second such light appear, or even the third. But by the time a dozen lights had appeared, the guards were starting to panic. More and more lights appeared by the second, the combined dull glow enough to highlight the silhouettes of 100 shadowy figures heading their way. The drumming of countless footsteps on the dusty ground grew louder and louder, drowning out the silence. "Sound the alarm!" one of the soldiers shouted as he turned and ran back inside. "The rebels are coming!" The clanging of bells erupted across the palace, waking all who slept and warning them to take up battle positions. Red and black soldiers scurried about like ants, grabbing weapons and setting up crude barricades, while those who had been patrolling the perimeter sprinted inside. As the last of the soldiers made it into the safety of the palace, the captain in charge of organizing the defense in the foyer looked up to the floor above, where a lone soldier stood before a heavy winch. "Close the portcullis." The soldier braced his arms against the handle, leant his weight against it, and pushed. He strained and he strained, the hairs of his luxurious beard bristling as he grit his teeth with effort. Yet nothing moved. "What's going on?" the captain shouted. "Private Fire! Get that grate shut." "It's jammed, Captain," Won't move. There was a sudden cacophony outside as the approaching mob reached the stairs, and 100 voices erupted into furious war cries at once. The pounding of their heavy steps could be felt through the ground. Close it! The captain yelled. Private Fire, who was perhaps suspiciously nonchalant about the whole thing if anyone cared to look closely, shrugged as if to say, what can you do? Panic flashed across the captain's face as the incoming horde drew ever closer. Retreat! The Fire Nation soldiers scattered, fleeing down smaller hallways and corridors. For those who'd been right at the front, such as the captain, there were too many bodies to push their way through to safety in time. Stones and screams began to fly as the Omashu rebels burst through the open doors like a tidal wave and washed into the palace, falling atop the last of the fleeing soldiers. There was a hectic energy in the air, a feeling of frenzy that promised violence. Yet before it could infect the rebels and lead them to give chase, General Young's commanding voice cut through the commotion. Don't get distracted. Hold positions. The members who'd once belonged to Omashu's army, disciplined by experience, came to a stop, and once they realized that backup wasn't following, the civilian volunteers stopped running too. All eyes turned to General Young as he stood upon the plinth of a nearby statue to gain some height. He checked to confirm that all the rebels had made it inside, and then nodded towards Private Fire, who still stood next to the winch. With a cheeky grin, Private Fire pushed the winch, which this time moved easily. The portcullis rattled as it closed, sealing off the palace from the city outside. The Fire Nation captain and the other soldiers who'd been captured in the initial incursion howled in outrage as they realized what had happened. Traitor! The captain yelled at Private Fire. You'd sell out your nation to these rebels. Private Fire took off his helmet to reveal the heavily tanned skin of a young water tribesman. Wrong nation! Sakar replied, twirling the hairs of the fake beard glued to his face between his fingers. The captured soldiers were bound and gagged as Sakar climbed a ladder down to the ground floor, meeting up with Ong and Katara as the crowd let them through to stand in front of General Young. Okay everyone, listen up! The general shouted. As we speak, the Demon of the North is arriving at our headquarters with her most elite soldiers. When she realizes we're not there, she'll no doubt figure out what's happening and come running back. We can't afford to be caught between her soldiers and the palace guards, so it is imperative that we escape the city before then. He nodded gratefully towards the blue spirit. Our agent has confirmed that the king's secret escape tunnel has yet to be discovered. All we have to do is make it to the crystal caverns beneath the palace and we'll be in the clear. However, the guards here will have fallen back to secondary defensive positions, and have no doubt also realized that their best chance at winning is to hold out for reinforcements. If their commanders have any sense at all, they'll be trying to block us from progressing forwards along the corridors, where the limited space will prevent us from rushing them all at once. There's no point in us sticking together if we're all just going to get bogged down in a single corridor. Young unfurled a map of the palace interior, which had 3 red lines drawn along it, all leading from where they were now to the caverns. There are 3 paths to the caves. Everyone here will split into 3 teams and each take a different route. When one group manages to clear a path all the way to the caves, they send messengers to the other groups to abandon their own fights and join them. That way we only need to win one battle to secure victory. Any questions? General. One of the rebels by the portcullis spoke up nervously. We may have a problem. All heads turned to peek outside. Far away, quickly rising in the night sky like a shooting star, was a dot of fire-orange light. As if summoned by their gaze, the dot twirled and began heading straight for them. It's her. The demon's coming! Another rebel exclaimed. She must have left her army to catch up alone. Run! A younger rebel shrieked. No, idiot! Stand together! We outnumber her, this could be our chance to take her down. Enough! Young cut in, silencing the panic beginning to spread. She won't be foolish enough to engage us all as a group. Chances are she's hoping she can delay us. We don't have the time to wait around for her trickery. We press onwards. But she'll attack us from behind. Someone shouted. Then I'll stop her. Katara stepped forwards, her face set in stone, and her blue eyes blazing with an icy fury. Young gave her an appraising look. Are you sure about this? Katara nodded. Yes. She replied tersely. She and I have a score to settle. Young held her gaze for a moment, searching her face for any sign of doubt or weakness. When he found none, he nodded back. Someone get this young lady some water. The rest of you, let's get moving. We're racing against time tonight. The rebels began to bustle around, organizing themselves loosely into 3 groups. As Katara went to wait by the portcullis, a hand reached out and grabbed her forearm. "What are you doing?" Sokka hissed, naked fear in his eyes. Ong, standing at his side, nodded in agreement. Standing up to her, Katara shot back. "I am sick and tired of running away whenever she turns up." "She's dangerous, Katara," Ong interjected. Katara looked at him, her frosty expression curling into a growl. "So am I. Then we'll stay with you," Sokka argued. "We'll fight her together." "No." Katara snatched her arm out of Sokka's hand. "The rebels need you and Blue to lead them through the palace, and Ong needs to go and rescue Bumi. I can handle this alone." Ong and Sokka shared a worried glance, but it was clear that Katara wasn't going to be swayed. "All right," Ong finally relented. "Just please, be careful. Paku wouldn't have wanted you to get yourself killed in his memory." "I won't," Katara assured him, a glint of steel flashing dangerously in her eyes. "The one getting hurt this time around won't be me." Chapter 78. There were only a few things that made Tanya absolutely livid. She insisted, a creature of logic at heart, and liked to think of herself as above the petty emotional reactions most people allowed themselves to be ruled by. The wastrels she'd been responsible for firing back in her first life had often ranted and raved about the unfairness of it all, yet she'd never so much as raised her voice in retaliation. None of them had been worth her time. It took something special to get her worked up by emotions, and the list of things that could do that was small indeed. Being X occupied the top of the list. The self-proclaimed god was the antithesis of everything she valued: freedom, capitalism, and logic. Trailing close behind him was that sanctimonious, hypocritical harlot Mary, not only because of her slavish devotion to being X, but because of the amount of comrades she had killed in her personal vendetta against her. Third place, however, did not belong to an entity at all, but rather a feeling. Tanya considered herself to be an intelligent person, more so than the average person in fact. She would never claim to be the next Albert Einstein, but it was rare for her to encounter a problem that she didn't feel she possessed the intelligence to solve. Yet perhaps it was because it happened so rarely, but the feeling that someone was outsmarting her set a fire underneath her like little else could. Being thwarted by bullshit divine intervention or brute force was one thing, but the suspicion that someone was smart enough to anticipate her actions and lead her around by the nose with nothing but good old-fashioned intelligence was absolutely infuriating. That was why, when she led a detachment of the finest soldiers in the Omashu garrison down the excavated tunnel, fully prepared to purge the rebels once and for all, only to find that the rebel headquarters had been evacuated no less than an hour ago, she saw red. Violent, bloody red. In hindsight, screaming back to the palace, now. And then rocketing off back through the tunnel and high into the sky had not been a stellar example of leadership, and she was sure she would look back on this moment with shame later, but right now she was too bloody furious to care. Never before in this life, or either of her previous lives, had she felt like this before, like someone was making a fool of her. Someone was playing her like a cheap violin. Someone had convinced her that there was a plague as ridiculously named as the Pentapox, all to draw her attention to a tunnel leading to their own headquarters, knowing that they could sacrifice it to draw her and her best soldiers away from the palace. They had plans hidden within plans, a great web of masterful misdirection that could have fooled even the finest strategic minds. And she'd been baited. Lured into a trap like a fish on a hook. Now the rebels may well be about to capture the strategic heart of the city under her watch. Was it Bumi? Was the crazy king so utterly brilliant that he'd been able to foresee her every move before he was even captured? Or was he somehow able to communicate with his rebels even while held in the most secure cell in Omashu? It boggled the mind, but Tanya did not know of anyone else who could be behind this. Had she met her match in a 100-year-old madman? Or was some unknown puppeteer pulling the strings behind the scenes? The cold night air whipped past her face as she soared in a beeline straight to the palace, mind already whirring away to figure out the optimum plan of attack. Ideally, the soldiers stationed at the palace would focus on holding the rebels back and waiting for the elite troops she'd taken to come back and reinforce them, trapping the rebels between two sides. With that in mind, the best thing she could do was clear away any obstructions the rebels had left in their path so that nothing would delay the reinforcements. But wait, her strategic nemesis had already proven adept at guessing her moves. What if that was exactly what they wanted her to do, and she was flying headfirst into yet another trap? If that was the case, her best bet was to do the opposite of what she'd been planning to do, unless of course her nemesis knew that she would do the opposite of what she'd normally do, and that would be playing into their hands and Tanya gave herself a hard slap around the face to silence her spiraling thoughts. What was she doing making rookie mistakes like this? Nothing killed a strategist's effectiveness like self-doubt. If you assumed that your opponent had foreseen every move you made, you'd end up destroying yourself for them. In a situation like this, where the threat of a hidden trap loomed over you, the best option was to keep your strategy simple, straightforward, and flexible enough to change on the fly. And what could be simpler than a head-on attack? The palace was rapidly approaching, and so Tanya flipped in a front roll so that she was falling towards it feet first, strategically slowing her descent enough to stop herself from breaking her legs. Deciding to be dramatic, as she landed she slammed one fist onto the ground, letting the fire from her hands and feet wash away in a wave of flames all around her. Nobody was watching, but it made her feel damn cool. As she stood up from her landing pose, Tanya wasn't surprised to see that the portcullis had been lowered to block the front gate. An irritating obstacle, but not an insurmountable one. She walked towards it and ran the palm of her hand across the thick bands of metal, measuring the width of empty square spaces between them. There were few defenses as effective in their simplicity as a portcullis, yet there was one little design flaw that few people besides herself were capable of exploiting. Unfastening the buckles of her armor, Tanya let the thin metal plates slide off of her and clatter to the floor one by one, until she stood in just the plain fire-red underrobe beneath the armor. Then she placed both hands against a pair of metal bars, tilted her head forwards, and began to squeeze herself through the gap. Portcullis were designed to allow archers to easily fire through them at invaders trying to storm a castle, and because of that the holes between the bars were big enough for a grown man to just about fit both arms through. The gap wasn't big enough for any adult to slip through, unless of course, by some unwanted miracle of divine intervention, that adult happened to have the body of a girl in her early teens who was short even for her age group. As humiliating as it was having to flop around and grunt like a greased pig trying to fit through a cat flap, Tanya was eventually able to pull herself through the metal grate and drop down onto the floor of the palace interior. At least none of my men saw that. She muttered to herself and she picked herself up again, brushed the dirt off her robes, and resumed walking forwards. The foyer of the palace was empty, but the mud and dust trampled across the floor and the sounds of raised voices echoing from out of the hallways made it clear that the rebels were nearby. Nobody had stayed behind to keep watch on the entrance, all they'd done was stack a few wooden barrels up against the corners of the room and leave. That seemed a little odd to Tanya. Surely they realized that even a closed portcullis would only delay her reinforcements for so long? It would only take one lucky soldier to find their way to the winch that opened it and her elite rooms would be able to rush in unchallenged. It was idiocy to not even leave a single guard. The faint rustle of clothes from above her, so soft she almost missed them, caught Tanya's ear, and instincts honed by decades of war blazed to life. She threw herself to the side just in the nick of time to avoid the hail of dagger-sharp icicles that would have crashed down on her head, skidding across the polished stone floor to safety. Tanya slipped her hands beneath herself and vaulted upwards, flipping in the air like an acrobat, and as her feet touched the ground she dropped smoothly into a crouched fighting stance. Her attacker meanwhile descended down from the ceiling in a spiraling spout of water like a spider, melting the fractured ice as her feet touched it and bending it around herself like a shawl as she settled into a graceful stance of her own. The air hung heavy between them as the two girls stared at each other in hateful silence, waiting to see if the other was about to attack. Well well, look who it is. The Avatar's cheerleader. Tanya taunted as the seconds passed and the waterbender made no move to initiate the fight. Better than the Fire Lord's little lapdog. The waterbender shot back. Chapter 79. Well well, look who it is. The Avatar's cheerleader. Tanya taunted as the seconds passed and the waterbender made no move to initiate the fight. Better than the Fire Lord's little lapdog. The waterbender shot back. Tanya took a slow step forwards, deciding to test how close she could get before the waterbender lashed out, and gave what she hoped was a smirk, but probably came out as more of a grimace. Who exactly are you anyway? She questioned, hoping that throwing a few barbs into a conversation might rile the girl up. Zuko just described you as the ditzy water peasant trailing after the Avatar. It'd be nice to put a name to your face. To her credit the waterbender didn't react. Or perhaps it was just that her expression was so baleful already that it just couldn't get any angrier. It's Katara. She replied icily. Of course I recognize you, mighty Admiral Tanya, even when you're trying to wiggle through the door like a fat seal in an ice hole. Tanya couldn't help the embarrassed blush that crossed her cheeks. She jabbed forwards, shooting a bullet-fast fireball at Katara's face in the hopes that it would startle her. Yet to her surprise Katara flowed backwards in an easy step and caught it between her hands, quenching the firewall in an instant with the pools of water coating both arms. "Oh, did I touch a nerve?" Katara asked slyly, raising a mocking eyebrow. "Bitch." Tanya took another step forwards, sinking lower into her stance as she mentally adjusted her strategies for the waterbender's increased skill level. "I don't remember you being able to do anything more than splash a few puddles around before. When did you learn to make yourself useful?" "Back at the North Pole. I was trained by Master Paco himself." "You say that like I'm supposed to know who that is." "You should." The frostiness of Katara's glare redoubled in intensity. "You killed him." Silence hung between them again as Tanya stared back at her. Then, with an exasperated huff, the firebender sneered. "Do you have the slightest idea how little that narrows it down?" That, finally, provoked a reaction from Katara. The waterbender bristled, her footwork slipping apart by just a fraction. "You really are inhuman. You know that?" she snapped. "I'm a soldier. This is a war." Tanya shouted back. "And you, your brother, your rebel friends, and every other fool who has tried to get between me and the Avatar is in my way." Katara grit her teeth so hard they looked like they might crack, anger thundering dangerously in her eyes. "You want me gone? Go ahead then. Try and get through me." Orange light began to simmer in the palms of Tanya's hands as the heat built up, ready to unleash fire at a moment's notice. "As you wish, peasant." Tanya growled. "Let's do this." Ong was a blur of movement. The monks had cautioned many times against using the wind run technique indoors. Running so swiftly that the naked eye struggled to keep up sounded great in theory, until you realized that your own eyes struggled to keep up as well. Many an excited young airbender in the past had run face first into a stone wall, and the results were never pretty. Yet despite the risks, Ong was in too much of a hurry to care right now. He had to free Bumi as quickly as possible. Every second wasted was time that the rebellion might not have. Doorways and flights of stairs blurred past as Ong ran higher and higher through the palace, trusting in his ability to sense the paths of the flowing air to avoid crashing. He didn't even stop when he came across a Fire Nation soldier, instead just flowing around them like the wind itself. It wasn't long before he screeched to a halt in front of the heavy metal door Sokka had described, and with a strong swing of his staff he unleashed a wild blast of air at the pair of soldiers guarding it, knocking them unconscious against the door before they could even comprehend what was happening. Ong fumbled around searching them for their keys, before finally finding them and getting to work unlocking the variety of mechanisms keeping the door shut. When the door began to swing open he slipped inside as soon as the crack was big enough to fit through. His eyes immediately settled on the metal coffin propped in the middle of the cell, and a wide smile burst across his lips as he spotted the face of his oldest friend within. "Bumi," he explained gleefully, racing forwards to free him. "Ong, no. It's a trap." A blue light flared up behind him, and the wind currents flowing across bald head screamed that something was coming. He whipped around, spinning his staff to create a shield of wind before he even saw the wave of blue fire crash down upon him. The shield protected him, even if it wasn't enough to stop the force of the impact from knocking him to the floor. "A pity. Zuzu claimed your agility was beyond human levels, and even Tanya admitted that landing a hit on you was like trying to catch the breeze in your hand. I should have known that they were both exaggerating to make up for their own inadequacies." The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of boot heels on metal echoed behind him, and Ong looked up to find a teenage girl in the uniform of a Fire Nation soldier approaching from the corridor. Had she been waiting for him to come here? Her cold, self-satisfied smirk was eerily highlighted by the pale blue flame she held in one hand, and something about the features of her face reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. The girl's smirk grew a little wider. "You are now my prisoner," she declared smugly as she raised the hand that held the blue flame, and made it flare violently in her grasp, casting long, haunting shadows across the cell with blue firelight. "But please, try to struggle a bit first. It makes it more fun when they try to fight back." Sokka ducked behind a pillar as a jet of fire erupted towards the space he'd been standing in. A second later a volley of rocks rocketed past him in the other direction, colliding with the firebender who'd attacked him with a satisfying thud. When no more fire blasts came hurtling his way, Sokka poked his head around the pillar to take in the battle raging around him. He had joined with the rebels that took the rightmost path to the caverns, and at first they'd done a pretty good job of bashing their way through the Fire Nation forces in their way. That had lasted up until they reached what appeared to be a large hall for dining in. The Fire Nation soldiers had overturned the long wooden table in the middle of the room and were using it as a barrier, which turned out to be made of a wood thick and springy enough to be very resistant to the impact of stones. All attempts to circle around it were met with fierce, concentrated streams of fire. The rebels here were stuck until they could figure out a way through, and as the self-proclaimed ideas guy it was up to him to do the thinking. "Let's see here," he muttered to himself as his eyes scanned the room for anything he could use. There was a humongous glass chandelier suspended from the ceiling above the table. The chains holding it in place seemed pretty thick, but if he could get it loose it'd force the Fire Nation soldiers to flee. "Excuse me," he said, tapping the nearest earth-bending rebel on the shoulder and pointing to the chandelier. "I don't suppose you could get me up there, could you?" The earthbender looked up, squinted his eyes a bit as if measuring the distance, and then nodded. "Sure. Brace yourself." Brace himself? Why? Wasn't he going to use earthbending to make him a ladder? The earthbender stomped hard on the ground, and Sokka let out a scream as the stone floor tile he was standing on suddenly erupted upwards, flinging him into the air like a catapult. His arms flailed wildly as gravity started to reclaim him, and as soon as he was within reach of the chandelier he grabbed a hold and latched onto it like a limpet. The chandelier swayed back and forth just a little as he clambered to his feet and balanced like a tightrope walker on one of the metal rods. That was awesome. 10 out of 10. Sokka jumped in fright, nearly losing his balance, as a voice unexpectedly piped up from next to him. He looked around, and was shocked to find that he was not the only person up in the chandelier. A pretty girl dressed in pink, with long auburn hair tied back into a large braid, was watching him with a bright, cheerful smile. Even as the chandelier shook and swayed she didn't even seem to notice, her body leaning back and forth with it to maintain a perfect balance. The girl cocked her head to the side as she looked him up and down. You know, you're kinda cute. What's your name?" Sokka gulped. Was she hitting on him? He wasn't complaining, of course, she was a very beautiful girl, but he hadn't been expecting anything like this to happen in the middle of a violent rebellion. "It's Sokka," he replied unsurely. "Sokka," the girl echoed, seeming to test the unfamiliar word in her mouth. Then her smile grew even brighter. "I'm Ty Lee. Sorry about this, but I'm going to have to capture you now." "Wait, what? Capture me?" Sokka questioned. "That's right," Ty Lee replied, advancing towards him without even seeming to notice the effort it took to stay balanced on the thin railing. "Try not to struggle, okay? This'll only hurt a little bit." Chapter 80. Twin blades flashed out like a pair of snakes, slapping a firebender's fist to the side just as he finished settling into a standard military firebending stance. Flames erupted from his fist, bellowing not into the rebels, as had been the original target, but into another firebender beside him. The first firebender jolted back in shock at his inadvertent friendly fire whilst the second yelped in surprise, and that second of distraction cost them both as the rebels they'd been trying to hold back surged forwards, knocking them to the ground. The palace library was one huge, messy melee as both sides fought tooth and nail. Rocks, fireballs, and the occasional heavy book flew wildly through the air in all directions, and only a few possessed the awareness to fight and avoid the projectiles at the same time. Zuko was one of those people. All 5 senses were strained to their limit as he ducked and weaved through the hail of danger. His ears pricked at the crackling of wildfire and he weaved like a serpent, letting a fireball sail past inches away from the back of his head. Then his blades shot out again, deflecting a poorly aimed rock into the path of a Fire Nation soldier. "Duck!" His gut instincts screamed at him, and without pausing to consider why, Zuko began to drop low as fast as he could. Milliseconds later a small thud smacked into his masked forehead right above his right eye. The object had been too small for his eyes and ears to pick up amidst the chaos, and if he had moved even a fraction of a moment later it would have stolen his eyeball. His gloves hands reached up to pluck the object from his mask. It was a tiny stiletto knife, and he recognized the craftsmanship. He looked up at the direction the knife had come from, already knowing who the thrower was yet hoping against all odds that he was mistaken. He wasn't. Standing atop one of the library shelves, staring down at him with her trademark deadpan expression, was Mai. Despite knowing that she shouldn't allow her so much as an extra second to throw another knife, Zuko hesitated. Mai wasn't his friend, not really. She was Angela's friend who he'd become acquainted with through her. Yet as sad as it was to admit, Mai and Ty Lee were the closest things he'd had to friends of his own age. Something within him recoiled at the thought of causing her harm, even if logically he knew she was tough enough to take it and dish it back out again with a vengeance. Seeing Mai dedicate herself to mastering a weapon was one of the things that had inspired him to take up swordsmanship. The moment of hesitation cost him. With an acrobatic leap Mai was in the air, and a veritable shower of knives burst from the folds of her sleeves to rain down upon him. Zuko's twin swords became a blur of flashing silver as he swiped whichever ones he could out of the air and dodged the rest, directing every bit of concentration he could muster into tracking the paths of Mai's knives. One lapse in focus was all it would take to get a sharp blade somewhere between his ribs. It was when Mai landed on the ground, bringing her hands down to brace against the impact of landing, that Zuko had his opportunity to close the gap between them. Mai was deadly at mid-range, but if he could keep the fight in close quarters he'd have the advantage. He might not be able to firebend without giving himself away, but he had enough skill with swords to hold his own against her so long as he could keep the circumstances in his favor. Unfortunately Mai was no fool, and had no doubt reached the same conclusion. As he drew closer Mai hopped back, vanishing amongst the crowds of fighting soldiers surrounding them. Zuko pushed through to the point where she'd been standing, but by then it was already too late. Mai was gone. Another buzz of metal, and Zuko swerved his head as a knife flew at him from the left, brushing past his ear before sinking into the back of a soldier behind him. Great, so they were playing hide and seek now were they? He gave his swords a twirl, then darted off into the crowd after her. Fortunately for him that was one game he was actually pretty good at. Waves of fire and ice hissed and roared as they collided together, filling the hall with a thick coating of steam. With a twisting hand motion Katara drew some of the stray vapor to her, condensing it back together into an orb of water to replenish her reserves. A second later she spent it again, flattening it out into a shield above her head to block the trio of fireballs that came whizzing towards her like fireworks. She stepped to the right, her stance flowing down low and her arms dancing in twisting arcs as she smoothly reshaped the shield into a whip, lashing out at a shadow of blonde hair she saw moving in the steam. This was, without a doubt, the most difficult fight of her life. Despite having crossed paths often recently, this was the first time that Katara had actually fought Tanya head-to-head, and she was beginning to see that Tanya's moniker as a demon was well earned. All of her talent, all her drive, all the power of the moon, and every trick Paco had ever drilled into her was barely allowing her to keep pace with the furious little firebender. The refinement of Tanya's technique was matched only by the brutality of her strategy. When she attacked head-on she was quick, precise, and unrelenting. But the moment you focused too hard on keeping up with the flow of her attacks she'd throw in some misdirection, delayed fireballs sweeping in from behind, bright flares of blinding firelight, or even sudden burst of jet flames that changed the speed and direction of her kicks halfway through the maneuver. Katara had defeated powerful fighters and tricky fighters before, but never someone who was both of those things at once. Yet she refused to lose. Not tonight. Not to her. She'd be damned if she let that devil get away with murdering Master Paco without at least a proper beatdown for payback. It was high time that someone gave the devil a taste of her own medicine, and taught her and her people that they couldn't go around bullying the rest of the world without expecting someone to push them back. A stream of fire came whooshing out towards her front, and with speed born from constant practice Katara twirled in her stance, spinning her water whip around to gather momentum and launching it like a spear right at the fire stream. Yet even as she did so she kept her awareness focused outwards, wary of an attack from the side or above. It took her by surprise when the stream of fire parted before the water hit, revealing that Tanya had in fact hidden herself within. The blonde devil jumped up and twisted, letting Katara's water spear pass inches beneath her spine, and her feet burst into bright flames as she rocketed forward straight towards her. The surprise only lasted a split second, but that moment of hesitation was enough to put Katara on the back foot as Tanya engaged her in a vicious fist fight. Jabs and stabs wreathed in fire came in from every direction, and Katara had to give ground again and again as she struggled to keep her guard up. Her palm slapped away a fist just before it crashed into her nose, only to wince as the heat scalded her skin. Each new blow she blocked brought a fresh wave of pain, and in a sudden flash of insight Katara realized that that was Tanya's plan. Cause enough agony to her hands and it would weaken her ability to bend. She needed to create some distance again, and quickly. Thinking on her feet, Katara rolled with the first idea that popped to mind. She had seen firebenders breathe fire before, and there was enough moisture in the air from all the steam for her to gather a decent amount of water just by breathing. She inhaled sharply, pulling a visible cloud of steam into her mouth with her bending, cooled it, and then breathed out a cloud of icy mist so blisteringly cold that it chapped her lips. The move caught Tanya by surprise and struck her in the shoulder before she could fully retreat, ripping a large hole in her red robes and leaving a nasty patch of blistered, frost-bitten skin.
Thanks for listening.